Under the siege of a large number of formations, the black flower ghost spider was obviously still affected, and its movements quickly slowed down, which also gave Zhou Daocheng an opportunity to let the giant snake lean forward, force it into a desperate situation, and then entangle it tightly. The black flower ghost spider tried its best to resist, constantly cutting a large number of wounds on the snake, which made Zhou Daocheng feel very distressed. At the same time, a large amount of spider silk was constantly spit out, trying to bind the giant snake in reverse. But in the next moment, the eldest brother Zhou Daobai made a direct move. In an instant, the cold and chilly breath came overwhelmingly, condensed on the white sword, and the bones seemed to come alive, releasing a strong sword light. In an instant, the terrifying breath made Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but take 2 steps back, and the surface of his body unconsciously appeared earth yellow true qi. It was after feeling the threat, the body autonomously appeared defense. Zhou Daocheng's pupils contracted, and his eyes turned sharply to the direction of his eldest brother Zhou Daobai. He unsheathed his white bone sword, which was as cold as a pond. His fierce attack instantly hit the black flower ghost spider and killed it easily. The whole process did not even take a second. Zhou Daocheng could truly feel its terrifying power. Even at the moment when he made his move, Zhou Daocheng felt the threat to his life. Even with his defensive ability, it seemed difficult to resist such a fierce move. It was even possible that he did not need to use the spirit puppet formation. With just the sword of his elder brother Zhou Daobai, he could easily kill this weak second-level monster. No wonder Zhou Daobai said that he did not need 2 people to attack, and he alone was enough. Looking at the strength he showed now, it seemed to be true. What really surprised Zhou Daocheng was actually 2 points, namely the white bone sword in his hand and the swordsmanship he used, which were extremely special and extraordinary. When Zhou Daobai easily killed the black flower ghost spider and sheathed the sword, his expression was still calm. Zhou Daocheng then stepped forward and couldn't help but frown and asked, "Brother, I see you haven't been out recently. Who helped you refine this second-level magic weapon? And you practiced the heart sword?" Brother Zhou Daobai smiled faintly, knowing that he couldn't hide it, so he said directly, "Let me answer the first question first. This sword was specially refined for me by Daoqi before he went into seclusion." Zhou Daocheng was stunned, and then he showed joy. 4th brother successfully promoted to a second-level weapon refiner. Although he had long known that 4th brother Zhou Daoqi was extremely talented, especially in weapon refining skills, even though he was only in the qi refining stage, he was already able to refine arrows for the second-level dueling bow, which was almost barely enough to reach the threshold of a second-level weapon refiner. However, Zhou Daocheng always believed that only after Zhou Daoqi reached the foundation building stage could he truly break through to the second-level weapon refiner, but he didn't expect that his talent seemed to be higher. Zhou Daobai was also incredulous, and said ambiguously, "He should be a second-level weapon refiner. I'm not sure. At least he successfully refined a magic weapon, but judging from his appearance when he came out of retreat, it seems that he consumed a lot of mana." Zhou Daocheng nodded slightly, but he didn't care too much. After all, if he wanted to refine a second-level magic weapon with the cultivation of the qi refining stage, it would naturally consume a lot of mana. But Zhou Daocheng still frowned and asked, "What about the second question?" "Brother, I remember I reminded you that although this set of 3rd-level swordsmanship is good, it has greater disadvantages. It's okay to learn from it. If you really practice it, I'm afraid there will be big problems." "Of course I know, but I have the confidence not to be affected by this set of swordsmanship," Zhou Daobai admitted frankly and said confidently. Zhou Daocheng frowned and said, "In the Xuanian sect, those who practiced this sword technique were all elders in the late stage of foundation building. Weren't they full of confidence? But you should know the final result." He was really anxious. After returning from the Juyin land, Zhou Daocheng specifically checked the history of the Heart Evil Sword and knew that it was an extremely evil sword technique. Many powerful elders of the Xuanian sect were controlled by the inner demon after practicing this set of skills, and fell into endless desires. In the end, their thoughts were confused, they lost their extreme, and then they were forced to be killed by the Purple Mansion strongman. And this information was not only read by himself, but also by his elder brother Zhou Daobai, so Zhou Daocheng was not worried that his elder brother would take such a big risk to practice, at most he would just learn from it. But what was unexpected was that his elder brother was really so bold. Seeing Zhou Daocheng's angry expression, Zhou Daobai smiled and said, "Sixth brother, don't be anxious, listen to my explanation. I think there is no problem with this set of swordsmanship, the problem is the people who practice this set of swordsmanship." "What do you mean?" Zhou Daocheng asked. Zhou Daobai paused and said, even in the Xuanian sect back then, it was believed that this set of swordsmanship was evil, so most of the people who practiced this set of swordsmanship were people with bad personalities and many desires in their hearts. Or they are greedy for women, or obsessed with cultivation, or they are full of hatred. So in the end, they will be controlled by these desires and mess up their minds. However, if the person who practices has no distractions in his mind, and only comprehends this swordsmanship with the sword, and is not affected and controlled by the heart evil, he will naturally be able to learn it, and will not fall into the state of going astray. Finally, Zhou Daobai's eyes were low, and his voice was clear, and he concluded, this is a set of swords of desire, but only people without desire can truly master it. With swordsmanship as the foundation, desire is just a means. Quote. As these words were spoken, Zhou Daocheng could feel the terrifying power constantly flowing through his elder brother's body, but it did not corrode his body, but was easily controlled by the sword technique. It seemed that all desires were just a kind of power hidden in the sword's edge. When needed, it could be directly mobilized, and it would not corrode the sword holder itself. And the elder brother Zhou Daobai's eyes were indeed clear. He had no desires or evil, and he was not affected by the heart evil, only the sharp sword intent. Seeing this, Zhou Daocheng's worries were slightly relieved, but his brows were still furrowed. After all, Zhou Daobai's appearance at this time did not look like a righteous person. He was surrounded by the aura of desire, and his breath was gloomy and terrifying, with a strong resentment, all shrouded in layers of clouds, like an evil demon. However, under such a terrifying appearance, the purest sword intent could be vaguely felt. Finally, Zhou Daocheng advised, brother, you should be more careful and don't go astray, otherwise the consequences will be disastrous. Okay, I know what I'm doing. Zhou Daobai nodded. Hearing this, Zhou Daocheng didn't say much. His brother was also a calm person, and was purely obsessed with swordsmanship. Perhaps he could really master this terrifying sword of the heart. After easily killing the black flower ghost spider and collecting the monster materials, Zhou Daocheng led the team back on the road. Now that he knows his eldest brother's true strength, Zhou Daocheng is more confident about his next actions. Although there are only 2 strong foundation builders in the team now, their actual combat power is not weak at all. The eldest brother Zhou Daobai, although on the surface he only has the cultivation level of the 2nd level of foundation establishment, his actual combat power should be able to reach the 3rd level of foundation establishment. As for how powerful the Shinsha sword can be when it is released at full strength, Zhou Daocheng actually does not know. And although he himself is only at the 1st level of foundation building, his actual combat power far exceeds the realm. With the spirit puppet formation and snake bone spirit formation, he is no weaker than the 2nd level of foundation building. With the cooperation of the 2 of them, it shouldn't be particularly difficult to surround and kill the monsters on the 3rd level of foundation building, so the 2 of them can continue to go deeper and look for stronger monsters. In the next 2 or 3 days, Zhou Daocheng and others continued to go deeper and encountered 2 2nd-level monsters, but they were only about the strength of the 1st level of foundation building. After killing them easily, they did not make much contribution. It wasn't until the 4th day, when he came to an extremely dense forest, that Zhou Daocheng suddenly stopped and looked at the jungle ahead with extreme vigilance. Zhou Daobai was also vaguely aware of it. After looking at each other and Zhou Daocheng, he lowered his voice and said, "It smells so rich. Is there a 2nd-level elixir here?" Zhou Daocheng nodded slightly, with a solemn expression. After using Wutu Qi to sense it silently, he said, "It is indeed a 2nd-level elixir, but the distance is a bit far, so I can't sense the specific elixir." The 2 of them continued walking forward, being extremely careful for fear of being discovered. In this environment, if such an obvious elixir can be produced, there is a high probability that it will be guarded by monsters, and its strength is definitely not weak. After almost walking through hundreds of meters of dense jungle, the 2 finally saw a cave hidden under green moss behind a broken rock. It looked extremely secretive and could not be seen unless you looked carefully. Zhou Daocheng scanned the situation near the cave and made some guesses based on the footprints on the ground and the surrounding environment. This should be the cave of the blood-tusk boar. Be careful. The strength of this monster is not simple. Zhou Daobai nodded slightly and said, "It is definitely not easy to be able to hold on to such a powerful elixir in such a harsh environment. But now, it just gives us an advantage. As long as its strength does not exceed the early stage of the 2nd level, we can handle." Zhou Daocheng nodded and arranged, "I will contain it. Brother, you are the main attacker and prepare to take action." Without much hesitation, Zhou Daocheng directly launched the formation. He was already deep in the cave and sensed the breath of the sleeping blood-toothed wild boar. The quicksand formation directly covered the land, and the golden J Batang formation began to spread underground, trying to secretly control the wild boar. However, in an instant, after sensing the subtle fluctuations of spiritual energy, the sleeping blood-tusk boar immediately woke up, violently broke away from the golden J Batang formation, and burst out with a heavy roar. No, I've woken up. Brother is ready to take action. Zhou Daocheng looked solemn and tried his best at the last moment to get the quicksand formation and golden J Batang formation into full operation, trying his best to control the movements of the blood-toothed wild boar. The eldest brother Zhou Daobai cooperated tacitly. As soon as Zhou Daocheng controlled the blood-toothed wild boar, he unsheathed the long-boned sword. The sharp sword light shot out without hesitation, piercing directly into the soil of the cave, instantly penetrating the blood-toothed wild boar back. Such terrifying power immediately injured the blood-toothed boar, and it burst out with a shrill roar. It resisted with all its strength, tried to break free from the constraints of the formation, and ran out from the depths of the cave. At this time, Zhou Daocheng could clearly sense the strength of this monster. It had reached the peak of the early stage of the second level, which was equivalent to a third-level foundation building monk. It was very powerful. Moreover, once this monster leaves the cave, it will no longer be constrained by the terrain, and its strength will inevitably increase significantly. Its strong body is able to withstand most second-level low-grade magic weapons, thick steel wool and skin. Even spells cannot be easily destroyed. What's even more terrifying are the two blood teeth, which have not been forged in any way, but are no less than ordinary second-level magic weapons. They are filled with rich blood energy, are extremely harmful, and also have a certain mental deterrent. Anyone who is hit by these two bloody teeth, coupled with their terrifying collision force, is afraid that even a third-level foundation-building monk will be unable to survive. Zhou Daocheng did not dare to be careless and immediately summoned the spirit puppets in the spirit puppet array to stand in front of him. At the same time, he said extremely seriously, "Brother, I will divert his attention, and you kill him quickly." Good. The array was spread out, and the spotted viper and the dark-eyed ghost-scaled snake rushed forward without hesitation, and were close to the blood-toothed boar in an instant. Zhou Daocheng knew very well that the blood-toothed wild boar's ability to move must be restricted. Once it lets go and collides, the battle will be completely controlled by the monster and it will be extremely vulnerable to injury. But as long as it is restrained in place, the offensive can be greatly restricted. Then the blood-tusk wild boar is nothing more than a wild boar with rough skin and thick flesh. The blood-toothed wild boar tried to escape, but the two giant snake spirit puppets were not afraid of death and directly wrapped around the forelimbs and neck. Even though it tried its best to resist and continuously caused injuries to the spirit puppet snakes, it could not get rid of the control immediately. It only took a few seconds for Zhou Daocheng to use the snake bone spirit formation again. Sharp snake fangs emerged from the ground and instantly pierced the blood-toothed wild boar's body from all directions surrounding it. However, it can be found at this time that although the snake bone spirit formation is a second-level formation, its power is actually not as strong as the spirit puppet formation. The power of the snake fangs is also seriously insufficient, and it is difficult to directly pierce the skin of the blood-toothed wild boar. Fortunately, the eldest brother Zhou Daobai was already prepared at this time. The white bone long sword in his hand trembled slightly, and there seemed to be a faint breath surrounding the long sword, and the breath became more and more terrifying. Zhou Daobai's eyes were sharp, and he shouted in a low voice. Angry sword. The white bone sword body seemed to have emotions, shaking and shaking constantly, and the evil spirit condensed by emotions seemed to have a trace of red, and the information became more and more terrifying. Compared with the previous killing of the black flower ghost spider, the power of this move is now several times stronger. The surrounding flowers, plants and trees are affected and seem to lose their vitality at this moment. Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but take a few steps back, looking down at the scene with a frown, muttering to himself, "Is this a second-level spell?" Obviously, the Heart Evil Sword itself is a set of spells, equipped with some special sword styles, which can burst out extremely powerful power. The angry sword slashed out, and the powerful sword light was completely wrapped in the angry evil spirit, and it slashed directly on the head of the Bloodfang wild boar. In just a moment, the sword light pierced directly into the skull, and there was only a crisp cracking sound, and the skull was directly shattered, followed by the shrill roar of the monster. The moment it felt its life threatened, the bloodfang wild boar struggled violently, and its agile body directly broke free from the entanglement of the spotted viper, almost tearing the snake's body apart, and crushed it with one foot. Zhou Daocheng looked at it and couldn't help but feel a pain in his heart. It seemed that after this battle, this set of spirit puppet formations was likely to be scrapped, especially the spotted viper, which was almost broken in half at this time. When the bloodfang wild boar was about to break free, fortunately, there was a snake bone spiritual formation to block it. Although the attack power of this formation was insufficient, the effect of trapping the enemy was very good, directly restricting the bloodfang wild boar. Once the first full struggle fails, there will be no more strength left, and the only thing left is to withstand the second-level swordsmanship of the eldest brother Zhou Daobai. In the end, a huge crack appeared on the blood-toothed wild boar, almost splitting its entire head, and finally lying on the ground dying. Zhou Daobai was also panting. Obviously, this sword consumed a lot of energy for him, and it was even difficult to use it easily. But the effect was beyond imagination, almost consuming more than 80% of the life of this third-level foundation-building monster, and almost killing it directly. After a slight pause, Zhou Daobai stabbed out a sword again without hesitation, directly ending the life of the monster. The battle process was smoother than the two had imagined. It cost almost nothing, and they won the battle without getting hurt. The only loss was the scarred, spirit puppet array, which seemed to be completely scrapped. The spotted viper was completely scrapped, and the black-eyed ghost-scaled snake was not much better. After enduring the struggle and trampling of the blood-toothed wild boar, its body was heavily damaged. More importantly, the spirit inside was severely damaged during the battle and had lost its spirituality. Only a little ethereal spiritual power remained, which could no longer be used. Although he felt sorry, it was only a matter of time before this formation was destroyed. Zhou Daocheng did not care too much, and the gains this time were no less than the losses. Zhou Daocheng walked up and began to collect spirits and decompose the body of the blood-toothed wild boar. The corpse of this monster has great value, and almost every material on it can be used. The most precious thing is this pair of blood teeth, which is not inferior to magic tools in quality. If it is refined, it can easily refine a second-level medium-grade magic tool. If it is exchanged for contribution points, the value will definitely not be low. However, Zhou Daocheng will naturally not use such noble monster materials to exchange for contribution points. He will most likely take it back himself. As long as you find a second-level refiner and spend a few spirit stones, you can add a second-level magic tool to the Zhou family. In addition, the leather of the blood-toothed wild boar is also an extremely precious refining material. Whether it is for making armor or refining other magic tools, it is a very good choice. In addition, there are also flesh, bones, tendons, etc., which are also very valuable materials. Zhou Daocheng naturally stuffed them all into the storage bag without hesitation. It took 2 storage bags to fill them up. Just hunting this monster beast brings value far beyond imagination. If all of them are exchanged for contribution points, at least more than 300. Moreover, there is another extremely precious item that Zhou Daocheng has not collected yet. That is the spiritual medicine in the blood-toothed wild boar cave. After Zhou Daobai recovered his spiritual energy slightly, the two went to the depths of the cave together. After entering, it was discovered that this was actually a cave located underground. Although it looks very narrow from the outside, once you enter the inside, you will find a different world. Not only is the area very spacious, but there is also a small pool inside. The rock above the head is translucent, illuminating the dark environment inside, which looks extremely suitable for life. Not to mention monsters, even humans can live here. The only drawback is that there is no spiritual vein here, the concentration of spiritual energy is insufficient, and it is a bit too humid. As soon as he entered, Zhou Daocheng only checked the environment briefly, and his eyes were attracted by something, so he walked over quickly. In the corner of the cave, 3 delicate white flowers were growing, with a faint white fluorescence in the dark cave, and strands of spiritual energy permeated out, and it looked very vigorous. Zhou Daocheng compared it slightly and guessed vaguely, is this Yuanling flower? Zhou Daobai was also a little uncertain and said, it looks a bit like it, the petals are heart-shaped, there is a circle of light yellow lines on the edge, the taste is green, and it lives in a humid cave. Neither of them is an alchemist or a spiritual plant master, so their ability to distinguish spiritual medicines is relatively weak, but with their knowledge, they can barely guess the variety of this spiritual medicine. Yuanling flower is the most important main material of the second-level inferior elixir, Yuanling pill, which is very expensive. This second-level inferior elixir is the most common elixir used to improve cultivation. Almost all cultivators in the early stage of foundation building will buy a Yuanling pill if they have the conditions, so there is no need to worry about sales. The elixir is in short supply in the market. The value of its material, Yuanling flower, has also risen. 1 Yuanling flower can refine a furnace of Yuanling pills, which is about 3 to 6 pills, with a total value of about 50,000 lingxi. It can be seen that the price of Yuanling flower itself is definitely not low. After thinking for a while, Zhou Daocheng carefully dug out all the Yuanling flowers, including the root of the bag, and then stored them in a second-level spirit box, intending to take them back to Wugu for planting. This kind of spiritual medicine is a spiritual medicine that does not require much production environment, so it is relatively easy to transplant and plant, and it can completely become a part of the Zhou family's heritage. If there is a second-level alchemist in the future, maybe he can directly refine Yuanling pills and bring a lot of benefits. Zhou Daocheng was also very excited. The value of these 4 Yuanling flowers even exceeded the value of the blood-toothed wild boar itself, and the harvest was quite rich. This is definitely the most valuable monster hunted since entering the 100 insects poison swamp. This also made Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but sigh, still have to hunt monsters with stronger strength. The materials and resources harvested are also more precious, and even the contribution points obtained are greatly increased. With the strength of him and his elder brother Zhou Daobai, the best choice is to hunt the third-level foundation building monster, which can just be suppressed, without too much danger, and can also get more harvests. So the next goal of the two is to find similar monsters. It would be best if there are some rare spiritual medicines in the monster's territory. In the following half a month, Zhou Daocheng and his team continued to act as usual, hunting various monsters one after another. Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai were also very tired. The 5 hunting teams that followed them also suffered a lot of losses in such a harsh environment, and several members had died here. Although their mission was simple, they were just auxiliary, and even had Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai to protect them, they were still attacked by some monsters and died in the end. However, they also gained a lot in the past half a month, and later hunted 2 second-level monsters. One of them was a silver-backed wolf with the strength of the second level of foundation building, but during the battle, it accidentally destroyed its spirit, resulting in a lot of losses. The value of the monster materials of this monster is not high, so the harvest each time is relatively low. The other one is a purple flame spirit cat, with the strength of the third level of foundation building, a monster that mainly attacks by sneaking and has extremely fast attack capabilities. It is extremely dangerous to encounter it in the wild jungle. Moreover, this monster also has a special purple monster fire, which has extremely strong power and can directly burn magic tools, which is more troublesome than the previous blood-toothed wild boar. Fortunately, all the abilities of this monster were completely crushed by Zhou Daocheng. Its proud sneak attack ability was directly carried by Zhou Daocheng. The moment it approached, Zhou Daocheng immediately noticed it, and quickly performed Wutu Gui Yuan, wrapped his whole body, and directly resisted this fatal blow. At that time, the purple flame spirit cat was shocked. He didn't expect that his full-strength attack would be blocked by weaker prey. He immediately lost his sense of proportion and tried to use his own, purple flame, to attack. Unfortunately, Zhou Daocheng would not give him a chance at all. The more powerful red snake flame in his body was directly released, instantly suppressing the spiritual cat purple flame. In the end, the eldest brother Zhou Daobai almost effortlessly solved this purple flame spirit cat with one sword. This powerful third-level monster is the most powerful monster encountered since entering the 100 insects poison swamp, but it is also the easiest monster to kill, without any extra effort. Moreover, this is also the monster with the richest harvest, bringing huge wealth, and the value of the monster materials exceeds that of the blood-toothed wild boar. Zhou Daocheng only collected 2 kinds of monster materials from the purple flame spirit cat, that is, essence, and cat's eye. As for other flesh, bones, fur, etc., the quality is very low. Zhou Daocheng did not want them at all, and threw them all away directly. Even so, with essence and cat's eye, it can even be compared with the monster materials of other monsters. First of all, the essence, which was not damaged at all during the battle, was extremely fresh and complete, and the mental strength was very high, which was very suitable for making spirit puppet array. In Zhou Daocheng's view, the essence of the peak second-level lower-grade monster is the maximum limit that the spirit puppet array can bear. If it is stronger, it will be completely unrestrained. Therefore, this kind of essence is extremely valuable. If combined with the essence of the Blood Fang Wild Boar, a very strong spirit puppet array can be refined again. The Blood Fang Wild Boar mainly attacks with force, charging on the front battlefield, with unparalleled combat power, while the Purple Flame Spirit Cat assists in the battle, mainly attacking and killing with surprise attacks, like a ghost. And there is a more important point, which can make the strength of the Purple Flame Spirit Cat infinitely close to the one in front. That is this pair of cat eyes. The cat eyes of the Purple Flame Spirit Cat are the place where the purple flame is made and stored. It has a very strong spirituality and contains fire. If it is obtained by the alchemist and the refiner, the demon fire can be extracted from it to assist in the refining of magic tools and pills, and it is extremely valuable. A second-level demon fire is worth at least 50,000 spirit stones. Even if the quality of the demon fire is high enough, it is not a problem to sell it for 100,000 spirit stones or 200,000 spirit stones. And the most important point is that the demon fire that can be refined is extremely attractive. Even in large-scale markets, the number of demon fires that appear is extremely small. Once they appear, they will be snatched by a large number of weapon refiners and alchemists. However, after thinking for a long time, Zhou Daocheng did not intend to extract the fire from the cat's eyes, but planned to refine the cat's eyes in the spirit puppet array, and become a part of the Purple Flame Spirit Cat spirit puppet. In this way, the strength of this spirit puppet will be infinitely close to that in life, almost comparable to the third-level foundation building cultivator. The value of a spirit puppet that has reached the third level of foundation building and can use demon fire is naturally self-evident. Even in the future, if the spirit puppet is damaged, Zhou Daocheng can still try to take out the cat's eyes and refine the fire in it. Although it is more difficult, it is possible after all. Just relying on the harvest of half a month, Zhou Daocheng feels that he has not lost anything. Even if he does not exchange any items, he has made a lot of money. They even have to thank the Wang family of Qianyan Mountain for killing the third-level monsters here and creating a safe enough environment for them to hunt monsters here with peace of mind. This is definitely a huge benefit. However, since he is here, Zhou Daocheng will naturally go all out to hunt as many monsters as possible. Maybe he will have a chance to exchange for a foundation building pill. The dense jungle is covered with dead leaves underground, and Zhou Daocheng and his party are resting inside. The high-intensity battles and explorations during this period have brought a lot of pressure to everyone, and the consumption of mana is also huge, so they often need to stop and rest. At this time, underground, 7 first-level superior, Earth Spirit houses, are connected to each other, and Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai, as well as 5 hunting teams, are in them. Zhou Daocheng and his elder brother Zhou Daobai sat opposite each other, with a pot of spiritual tea placed on the earthen table in front of them, and the two were talking. Daocheng, we have rested for a day, and the Spirit Snake sect and the Earth Demon sect have also caught up. Do you still plan to move forward? Zhou Daocheng drank a sip of tea and said thoughtfully, the location we are in now is completely out of the periphery of the 100 Insects Poison Swamp. If we continue to go deeper to the east, I am afraid we will encounter monsters above the second stage, and we may not be able to deal with them. Moreover, if we go further east, the miasma will become extremely dense, and I am afraid the danger level is not low. Zhou Daobai nodded. Then we will hunt monsters in this area. Hunting some high-value monsters should also be able to exchange for a lot of contribution points. Okay, don't rush to go deeper. The two were talking, but suddenly, they both shut up at the same time, looked up at the top of their heads, and frowned. Zhou Daocheng's eyes condensed. He vaguely felt that the breath of the foundation building cultivator was approaching, and the cloud and mist formation used for warning also wanted to know some breath. Then, in the next moment, there was a loud noise above my head, and the powerful magic power instantly fluctuated, scaring the two of us underground. Including the 5 hunting teams, after sensing the movement above their heads, they immediately rushed over. Meng Yushan frowned and asked, Sir, what happened? Did someone discover us and launch a surprise attack? Zhou Daocheng shook his head and said, Don't worry, they probably didn't come for us. It was probably a fight between monks. Zhou Daocheng believed that he had no enemies, and now that they were underground and hidden by formations, it would be difficult for any monk to discover them. What's more, if there were really a sneak attack by monks, the Tuling Lodge would have been smashed to pieces by now, and it would never be as stable as it is now. And judging from the current situation, it's just that spiritual energy has spread here, causing a little shock. After Zhou Daocheng sensed it for a while, He opened his mouth and gave instructions. You guys stay here first, and I and fellow Taoist Zhou will go outside to see the situation. After saying that, he and his eldest brother Zhou Daobai left Tuling Lodge through a secret exit. The fluctuations of spiritual energy have gone away. The two of them carefully explored the situation and felt that the strength of the two fighting against them was not weak. They should both have the cultivation level of the second level of foundation building. Although his strength is very impressive, it is not something that scares the two of them, and they can't help but breathe a sigh of relief. After the two looked at each other, they rushed out of the Tuling hut together and headed towards the area where the mana fluctuated. Almost a moment later, after traveling several kilometers to the east, Zhou Daocheng finally found the traces of the two of them. Through the thick miasma, two figures appeared in the jungle. Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but let out a sigh. He didn't expect that these were actually two acquaintances. Maybe they couldn't be called acquaintances, they could only be said to have met each other. They were the old woman from the Zheng family whom they met at the exchange meeting, and the woman in black from the Lu family who made a deal with Zhou Daocheng. Seeing this scene, the eldest brother Zhou Daobai looked strange. He couldn't help but glance at Zhou Daocheng and said, Daocheng, you are very charming. You can actually provoke two female monks to duel for you. Zhou Daocheng twitched the corner of his mouth and said speechlessly, does this have something to do with me? And that old woman is over 100 years old. No matter how charming I am, I won't be able to make this old woman fascinated, right? Maybe this is what she wants. Zhou Daocheng. Zhou Daocheng ended this topic as soon as possible and returned his attention to the two sides. Although these two people have some conflicts, they are definitely not enemies to the point of life and death. Looking at the current situation, they have both directly entered the depths of the 100 insect poison swamp, and their hatred is definitely not low. Moreover, even if there are monks with grudges, most of them will not conflict at this time. After all, the cleanup of the 100 insect poison swamp is organized by the two major Zifu forces. If you disrupt the order at will and make the two major families unhappy, you will only they were afraid of the consequences and the two families simply couldn't afford it. Zhou Daocheng had doubts and carefully approached the area where the two sides were fighting, and vaguely heard their conversation. The woman in black from the Lu family said in a cold voice, Old Madam Zheng, if the Wang family and the Tang family knew that you were committing murder and seizing treasures, do you think you could leave the 100 insect poison swamp alive? Jia. So do you think I will let you go? The old woman from the Zheng family smiled sinisterly. As she spoke, she rushed forward with a fierce and powerful momentum. Both of them are second-level foundation building monks, but the old woman from the Zheng family broke through earlier, so she is stronger. At the same time, the woman in black from the Lu family seemed to be seriously injured. There was a very long wound on her abdomen and blood was still flowing out. Her current strength should only be about one level of foundation building, so she was chased and beaten. On the side, Zhou Daobai frowned and said, the old woman of the Zheng family is so brave to kill people and seize treasures under current circumstances. Zhou Daocheng thought for a while and said, I heard that the Zheng family has been in decline in recent decades. They spent all their wealth to buy 2 foundation building pills, but in the end they failed to make a breakthrough. Old Mrs. Zheng is also dying, and the family inheritance is in jeopardy. Now it's not hard to understand why you're crazy. Zhou Daobai nodded. After all, seeing that the family's foundation building inheritance was about to be cut off, how could old Madame Zheng be willing to do so? Therefore, even if he risks himself, he will most likely fight to the death to find a way out for his family. Considering this, Zhou Daocheng's eyes suddenly lit up and he said, if this old woman is willing to take such a risk, then the value of the treasure she robbed should not be low. It is indeed possible. Zhou Daobai's calm eyes also showed some waves. Maybe, it is a treasure that can help break through the foundation building. It may also be extremely expensive heavenly materials and earthly treasures that can help her exchange for a large number of spiritual stones. Zhou Daocheng guessed. Then shall we take action? Hold on. Zhou Daocheng hid in the dark and carefully observed the changes on the battlefield. The two kept attacking each other, using deadly moves without hesitation, causing injuries to each other. The woman in black from the Lu family was seriously injured and could only trade injuries for injuries to delay time. The situation was already in danger. The old woman from the Zheng family also hoped to resolve the battle as soon as possible. For fear of attracting other monks, she also ignored her own injuries and only attacked without defending. She was almost desperate. Such a fierce battle lasted for about half an hour, and the woman in black from the Lu family was finally defeated. She was directly hit in the chest by the old woman's spell, and was hit to the ground with a bang. She spit out a mouthful of blood and was almost dying. The old woman was also seriously injured, but she could barely stand. After seeing the winner, a gloomy smile appeared on her face. But just as she was halfway through her smile, the smile on her face froze. I saw a long sword flying towards her, stabbing her hard, and a blood arrow sprayed in the air. The expression of the old woman from the Jung family changed drastically in an instant. In an instant, the old woman tried to use a spell to resist, but the next moment her legs were tied up by thorns and vines, making her unable to move. Big brother Zhou Daobai was the first to move cleanly and neatly. The sword of the angry sword broke through the air, and the light red true energy reflected the dark forest. The burst of breath overturned the surrounding trees. The terrifying power was enough to match the third-level foundation building cultivator. It directly knocked the seriously injured Jung family old woman away. The sword tip made a huge hole in her chest, and blood splashed in the air. He attacked without hesitation and reversed the situation in the shortest time. Even in her prime, the Jung family old woman probably couldn't fight against Zhou Daobai, who practiced the Yin Sha sword, let alone the state of being seriously injured after fighting with the Lu family woman. And for safety reasons, Zhou Daocheng was still waiting by the side. The moment the Jung family old woman flew out, a red snake tattoo appeared on her body, and a terrifying flame attacked. The flames attached directly to the body of the Jung family old woman. No matter how she struggled and screamed on the ground like an evil ghost, it was useless. Finally, Zhou Daobai ended her life with a sword. In the last look at the old woman of the Jung family, he murmured inaudibly, "You were so arrogant to my sixth brother at the trade fair, it is not too much to kill you today." The two of them took action, of course, not without reason. On the one hand, the previous conflict made the two prejudiced against the old woman. On the other hand, and the most important point is that this person provoked a civil war in the process of clearing monsters. If he was handed over to the Wang family, he might have made a contribution. The old woman of the Jung family looked terrified, but in the end she could not say a word, and she collapsed to the ground and was burned to ashes. Zhou Daocheng also picked up the storage bag on the ground with a little surprise on his face. He didn't care whether the old woman had offended her or not. Even if he changed someone today, if he could get enough benefits, he would still take action. Just taking a look into the storage bag, Zhou Daocheng showed a shocked expression and said to himself, this old woman was not wrong to kill her. The resources in it were much richer than imagined. Zhou Daocheng stuffed them into his pocket without counting them carefully. After all, the situation is not completely over yet. Although the woman in black from the Lu family is dying, she has witnessed the whole process of Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai killing the old woman from the Jung family. This is a big hidden danger. Zhou Daocheng suppressed the smile on his face, frowned slightly and looked at the woman in black from the Lu family on the ground. At this time, she collapsed on the ground and slightly raised her weak eyes. In response to this, Zhou Daocheng's expression remained unchanged. The red snake tattoo on his body showed a slight aura of flames. A cold flash appeared in his eyes. He raised his hand directly to deal with this woman. But the next moment, Zhou Daobai's eyes moved. He stepped over, and urgently stopped Zhou Daocheng with the hilt of his sword. Sixth brother, stop. Zhou Daocheng was doubtful, but he still stopped and looked at his elder brother Zhou Daobai with some doubts. Zhou Daobai did not speak directly, but first looked at the woman in black from the Lu family underground, and then knocked her out with a light blow without damaging her life. After doing all this, he frowned and looked at Zhou Daocheng and said, sixth brother, you reminded me not to be controlled by the hard evil sword, but now it seems that your murderous intention is stronger than mine. Hearing this, Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but frown, and said matter-of-factly, this person saw us killing the old woman of the Jung family. She is a disaster. It is not an exaggeration to kill her. Zhou Daobai still shook his head, and while putting away the bone sword, he said solemnly, so what if I saw it? Besides, the old woman of the Jung family is at fault for this matter. Even if she leaks the secret, it will not affect us in Wugu. What's more, she has no evidence. There is no reason to deal with us. After he finished speaking, he looked at Zhou Daocheng with a serious look and said, sixth brother, you are too murderous. This is not good for your future. Zhou Daocheng was also stunned. He didn't expect his elder brother to say this. His character has always been like this, and he feels that there is nothing wrong with doing so. Cutting off the roots is the best choice to maximize benefits. But now that he was reminded by his elder brother, Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but reflect, was he really too murderous? After thinking about it carefully, I found that there are indeed many times when it is obviously not necessary to kill people and silence them, but in order to obtain more benefits and ensure that everything is foolproof, I will still take action without hesitation. This may not be wrong, but it cannot be said to be right. It is a choice made based on one's own position and values. Just like the situation before him, the woman in black from the Liu family had no enmity against him, but he chose to kill her without much thought. The eldest brother Zhou Daobai continued. This woman also has a large foundation building family behind her. Can you ensure that today's affairs are foolproof and not discovered by anyone? Making enemies at will is definitely not a good thing. Sixth brother, you have to pay attention. As soon as these words came out, Zhou Daocheng suddenly woke up. He thought that doing everything right was the safest way, but in fact, wasn't this a potential danger? There are countless secrets in the world of immortality, and no one can guarantee that everything will be foolproof. It is indeed unwise to make enemies at will. Even taking a step back, everything has a spirit, let alone people. Killing at will and despising life are also detrimental to future cultivation. Zhou Daocheng nodded deeply and said, "Thank you for reminding me, brother. I will pay more attention to her in the future." So how does brother plan to deal with this woman? Hearing this, Zhou Daobai nodded happily and said, "This woman comes from the Liu family of Moon Lake. She is also a foundation-building family with a long heritage and profound foundation. It is said that there are 3 strong foundation-building experts. If we can make friends with each other, maybe we can get another ally. Then let me make the arrangements, brother. It's also a good thing to have a good relationship." Zhou Daocheng didn't refuse. To have a good relationship is indeed a good thing for the Zhou family today. The two said nothing more. After Zhou Daocheng was able to burn the body of the old woman from the Zheng family, he took the woman in black from the Liu family back to Tuling Lodge. Seeing the woman who was in a coma and seriously injured, Zhou Daobai couldn't bear it. He took out a healing elixir and gave it to the woman. Based on her current injury, if she is not treated as soon as possible, I'm afraid it will leave permanent damage. Zhou Daobai said calmly. Zhou Daocheng nodded and said, "Since you have chosen to save her, let's help her to the end." A second-level healing elixir can be exchanged for the goodwill of the Foundation Establishment family. This is not a loss. After settling the woman in black from the Liu family, Zhou Daocheng also began to check the items in the Zheng family's old woman's storage bag. This is a second-level storage bag. It can store a lot of items inside, and there are indeed many good things inside. A large part of them were the magic weapons, elixirs, talismans, etc. that I carried, and I even saw a set of earth spirit cabins among them. Zhou Daocheng picked and found that many elixirs and talismans were of first-level quality, so he threw them aside. He only took 2 second-level low-quality, returning pills, which are a kind of elixir for restoring spiritual energy, but the value is not very high. As for the magical weapon, there is only one, which is a second-order low-grade black rattan whip. The quality is also not high, and it is a relatively niche magical weapon. In this regard, Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but frown. It seemed that this old woman from the Zheng family was actually not rich, and could even be said to be very shabby. She could not afford precious elixirs, talismans and magical instruments. However, Zhou Daocheng found many precious treasures in the storage bag. The most precious of them were the black jade soul-nourishing wood and soul-binding crystal stone that he had intended to exchange at the exchange meeting, but it solved a problem in Zhou Daocheng's mind. With these 2 treasures, he could indeed try to delve into the second-level spirit puppet array. In addition, Zhou Daocheng also found a lot of monster materials, which should be monsters hunted after entering the 100 Insects Poison Swamp. Among them, there were more than a dozen first-level high-quality monsters. Although the value was not high, even if it was exchanged for contribution points, it should not exceed 50, but Zhou Daocheng accepted them without hesitation. These monster materials were not suitable for exchange for contribution points. It was better to bring them back to Wugu so that the Zhou family could refine them into magic tools. Whether they were sold or equipped with Wugu's combat power, the value was far higher than the contribution points. In addition, there were 2 second-level low-quality monster corpses, whose strength should be equivalent to the first level of foundation building, and the value was not low. Zhou Daocheng also collected them all. However, among all the items, the most precious one was an exquisite sapling. When Zhou Daocheng saw the sapling, his eyes lit up a little, as if he was a little unbelievable. When he took out the tree and placed it in front of his eldest brother Zhou Daobai also rubbed his eyes in disbelief, as if he was a little unsure of the species of the sapling. Brother, is this the legendary spiritual plant? I don't seem to be sure. Zhou Daocheng asked tentatively. Zhou Daobai looked at it again and again, but he was still a little unsure, and said ambiguously, "It does look like it, but I have never seen it before. If it is really that kind of spiritual plant, then we will make a fortune." Now the two were talking. A cough suddenly came from the bed next to him, followed by a faint voice. "It is indeed the spiritual plant you think of, the spiritual longevity tree." Zhou Daocheng heard the name, and a trace of excitement flashed in his eyes. He looked at the woman on the bed with some surprise and said, "Is it really the spiritual longevity tree?" The black-clothed woman of the Liu family who had woken up nodded weakly and said, "I found it in an underground cave, but the old woman of the Zheng family found it, attacked me, and snatched the spiritual plant away." Zhou Daocheng nodded slightly. It was no wonder that the old woman of the Zheng family was so persistent. This level of spiritual plant was worth risking her life to snatch. The Lingshou tree is an extremely precious second-level spiritual tree. When it grows up, it generally reaches the peak of the second-level upper grade. The one in front of him is only the second-level middle grade, and it should take a long time to mature. After it is fully mature, it will bear fruit every 50 years. The fruit is called Lingshou fruit. Lingshou fruit has extremely precious value. It can be refined into the second-level upper grade, Lingshou pill, which can add 20 years of life to the life of the foundation building cultivator. Its value is much more precious than the foundation building pill to a certain extent. It is truly a gift from heaven and earth, and it is also one of the few second-level pills that can increase life. Even if it is not refined into a pill, the Lingshou fruit can directly increase life by 10 years, but most people will not waste it like this. Zhou Daocheng could not hide his excitement. If the Zhou family had this spiritual tree, it would definitely greatly increase its foundation. What does this mean? It means that every foundation building strongman of the Zhou family will have an extra 20 years of life than the cultivators of the same level in the future, which makes the probability of breaking through the purple mansion higher and makes the Zhou family's inheritance more stable. Maybe in 1 or 2 generations, not much change can be seen, but if you want to become a 1,000-year family, you must look at the long term. Lifespan is the most precious thing in the entire world of immortal cultivation, and all items that can increase lifespan are of unimaginable value. If you take out a Lingshou pill and auction it at the auction house, it is easy to get a price of more than 100,000. If you give the Lingshou pill to the powerful Zifu family, it is not difficult to exchange it for a foundation building pill, and you will even gain the favor of the Zifu family. No matter from which aspect, the value of this sapling is far beyond imagination. Not daring to be careless, Zhou Daocheng hurriedly walked out of the tooling house, took a batch of spiritual soil from outside, and then directly mixed it with spiritual liquid and honey to make it into a high-quality spiritual soil, and then wrapped it on the rhizome of the Lingshou tree to ensure that it can survive. Even at this moment, Zhou Daocheng had the idea of returning directly to the Fog Valley, because there was no need to take risks in the 100 Insects Poison Swamp. What is the purpose of coming to the 100 Insects Poison Swamp and hunting wild beasts in a dangerous environment? Isn't it for the purpose of exchanging for the foundation building pill? However, the value of the Lingshou tree has exceeded the foundation building pill to a certain extent. If the Lingshou fruit can be grown successfully, it can be easily exchanged for the foundation building pill. However, considering that they are cleaning up monsters for the Wang family of Qianyan Mountain after all, it is not appropriate to withdraw at will. They can only suppress their excitement and temporarily put away the idea of going home. However, at this time, Zhou Daocheng looked at the black-clothed woman of the Liu family with a hint of murderous intent. Zhou Daobai, who was standing aside, naturally sensed it clearly, but did not stop it, and his expression was a little struggling. Because the value of the Lingshou tree is so high and the impact it can bring is so great that it may bring a catastrophe if it is not careful. Even if it is the Purple Mansion forces, if they know that Wugu has such a treasure, I am afraid they will also snatch it. Faintly sensing the danger, the black-clothed woman of the Liu family obviously understood her situation and hurriedly said, "I was able to survive this time thanks to the 2 Taoist friends who rescued me. Since the Lingshou tree is in the hands of the 2 Taoist friends, it naturally belongs to the 2 of you. I will never leak this matter." Zhou Daocheng did not hide it, and said in a slightly low voice, "If it was something else, it would be fine, but this is a Lingshou tree. How can you let me believe you?" The black-clothed woman of the Liu family gritted her teeth and said, "I am Liu Qinyu of the Liu family. Heaven is above. I swear by my heart of Taoism that from now on, if I leak the matter of the Lingshou tree in any way, my cultivation will not improve at all and I will die of demonic possession. Zhou Daocheng was stunned. He did not expect that the other party would actually swear a poisonous oath. In the world of cultivating immortals, blaming heaven and swearing by one's own heart of Taoism is extremely binding, and it will indeed be controlled by the dark. If you break the oath, you will be punished by heaven. At least, if you break your oath, you will be disturbed by various demons in your heart when you break through the realm in the future. Even if you practice normally, you may enter a state of demonic possession. There were evil cultivators who thought they were lawless and swore by the way of heaven and the heart of the Tao at will. Later, they broke their oaths at will, which led to them being struck to death by lightning during their practice without any signs or resistance. This kind of restraint from the unknown can completely restrain cultivators, and few people dare to swear easily. However, Zhou Daocheng seemed to be still uneasy, and said, "Please add one more sentence, Miss Liu. If Miss Liu breaks her oath, the Liu family will be destroyed, blood will flow like a river, and the family will be exterminated." Liu Qinyu was stunned, gritted her teeth, hesitated for a long time, and finally added this sentence according to what Zhou Daocheng said. It's not that Zhou Daocheng is suspicious, but for many people in the family, the interests of the family are higher than personal interests. It is not impossible to exchange one's life for the future of the family. But even if he swore so, Zhou Daocheng was still a little worried, and he had the intention to kill many times, but he restrained himself in the end. Finally, he sighed and thought helplessly in his heart, maybe what the eldest brother said is indeed right. It is not a good thing to have too much murderous intention. It is necessary to restrain it. Since Liu Qinyu swore a poisonous oath, Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai didn't say anything more, but Liu Qinyu hesitated for a moment and suddenly spoke. "My two Taoist friends, I will definitely not disclose the matter of the Lingshou tree, but I have a request that I hope you can agree to. Tell me, if we can reach an agreement, I can agree." Zhou Daobai said calmly. Liu Qinyu nodded and said, "Although the other two foundation building experts of my Liu family are only over 80 years old, they were seriously injured in a war, so they lost a little life. It is estimated that they can only live to 160 years old. 70 years old. If it's possible, when the Lingshou tree bears fruit, can you sell 2 foundation establishment pills to my Liu family? Since my Liu family will be grateful." After hearing this, the eldest brother Zhou Daobai thought for a while and said, "If your Liu family is willing to form an alliance with me and Wugu, exchange needs, cooperate with each other, become allies, and even marry each other, maybe we can agree to this. After all, it is impossible to sell such a precious elixir to the enemy." Liu Qinyu just thought about it briefly, and I immediately agreed and said, "No problem. I will go back and talk to the Liu family at this time. It shouldn't be a problem." No matter from which aspect, Liu Qinyu would not choose to refuse. After all, the identity of Wugyufeng City today is not simple. On the one hand, it is its status in the Wang family of Qianyan Mountain. As the earliest force to stand in line, its status will be more or less higher than other forces, and it will also receive the attention of the Wang family. On the other hand, Wugyufeng City is located outside the East Great Wilderness and is the closest small city to Donglanfeng City. It has great potential in itself. Finally, the combat power possessed by Wugyufeng City cannot be underestimated. It has risen in just a few years and has 3 strong foundation builders. Even compared to the Moon Lake Liu family, which has been inherited for hundreds of years, it is only between the two. Liu Qinyu also dreamed of being able to make friends with such an emerging force. After the two parties confirmed their relationship, the atmosphere at the scene relaxed a lot. Liu Qinyu said, "Fellow Taoist Wugu, fellow Taoist Zhou, what are you going to do next? If we are hunting monsters nearby, maybe we can act together to ensure safety. Sex can also be improved." After Zhou Daocheng thought for a while, he said, "We shouldn't stay here for too long, or we will continue to go deeper to the east." Continue to the east. There may be mid-level second-order monsters there. The danger is too great, so Liu will not go there with us. After Liu Qinyu thought about it, she still did not choose to act with Zhou Daocheng and others. Zhou Daocheng didn't try to stay. Liu Qinyu's joining would be very troublesome. After all, Wu Jiyu cannot act as he pleases and needs to discuss with the Disha sect and the Spirit Snake sect. Their 3 parties are still true allies and it is impossible to change the plan because of Liu Qinyu. Even taking a step back, if Liu Qinyu is allowed to join Wugu's team, how will the final harvest be distributed? As for letting Liu Qinyu act alone, she can't stand on her own strength, so her existence is very embarrassing, and it is better to act on her own. As for the combined combat power of Wugu, Spirit Snake Sect, and Disha Sect, there are 6 foundation building experts, enough to explore deeper areas, and naturally look for more valuable heavenly materials and earthly treasures. However, despite this plan, Zhou Daocheng did not leave Lu Qinyu. Instead, he rested for 2 days and waited for Lu Qinyu to regain her strength before saying goodbye to her. At the same time, the Tuling cottage, in the old woman's storage bag of the Zheng family was given to Lu Qinyu so that she could gain a foothold in the wild environment. Lu Qinyu was also quite emotional. After thanking him, he left alone, while Zhou Daocheng and others were officially on their way. On the other side, the Spirit Snake Sect and the Disha Sect had also rested for 2 days to recuperate their energy. Then the 3 parties met briefly to determine the next action, and then went deep into the poisonous insect swamp together. The current location of everyone is already in a relatively deep area of the 100 insect poison swamp. If you look at the map, you should have crossed the Great Eastern Wilderness and officially entered this unexplored wilderness. The 3 forces still operate separately, but the distance between them is closer, only about 3 kilometers, ensuring that they can support each other no matter what happens. The deeper you go, the smaller and worse the surrounding environment becomes. An extremely strong miasma permeates the woods. The powerful giant trees are intertwined with each other, like dark pythons surrounding the moist forest. The thick trunks support the dense canopy. Everything seems to be. It was dark and gloomy, with only the sound of rustling leaves mixed with the sound of insects crawling by. Under the damp leaves and weeds on the ground were slippery, wet mud, as well as dead vines and trees. It was extremely difficult to walk in it, and it was extremely hot and oppressive. No one dares to be careless, because the real dangers here are all kinds of highly poisonous insects and plants. There are even some special elixirs that are only of the first level, but the toxins in them are effective on foundation building experts. If the toxins cannot be discharged with true energy in time, even foundation building experts will be greatly damaged. What's even more frightening is that even if some toxins are poisoned, they will not be discovered for a short time, but once the toxins spread, they are almost impossible to treat. Along the way, even though they were very careful, 2 team members who were at the 8th level of chi refining were still touched by a dark green butterfly. In the end, they were directly exposed to corrosive toxins, and their whole bodies rotted to death. So far, there are a total of 50 people in the 5 hunting teams, and 14 people have died. The losses are not small. These people are all the elites Wu Jiyu has accumulated over the years. Zhou Daocheng is heartbroken every time someone dies. But it is impossible to stop. We can only be as careful as possible to ensure everyone's safety. This situation not only happened to Wu Jiyu, but also to the Disha Sect and the Spirit Snake Sect, and the losses were even greater. Especially the Earthly Evil Sect, which directly brought in 8 hunting teams. It was difficult to take care of everyone's safety, so the mortality rate was the highest, and 20 disciples had already been lost. Lin Xiaoyuan's face was dark, and he regretted bringing so many people in. From the current situation, it is the best choice not to bring any chi refining cultivators. After all, they are too weak and it is difficult to protect themselves in the current environment. However, at this point, the 3 forces can only bite the bullet and rush forward. After walking for about half a day, Zhou Daocheng encountered the first second-level monster, which was a huge butterfly. The hole was dark green. It was hard to tell what kind it was, but the aura was extremely powerful. Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai took a look and took a few steps back in fear, because the strength of this monster had reached the middle stage of the 2nd level, which was equivalent to the 4th to 5th level of foundation building. Faced with this situation, Zhou Daocheng did not hesitate to contact the Earthly Evil Sect and the Spirit Snake Sect. Only by joining forces could the 3 parties solve this powerful monster. If it can be successfully killed, it will definitely gain a lot. However, after contacting each other for 2 cups of tea, there was no response from the other 2 parties. Zhou Daocheng frowned immediately, having a bad feeling. Under the current situation, the 3 parties will naturally increase the frequency of contact after just going deep into the poisonous swamp of hundreds of insects. How could they not respond? Not long after, Lin Xiaoyuan took the lead in replying. After seeing the content of the reply, Zhou Daocheng's face turned green. Lin Xiaoyuan, fellow Taoist Wugu, we are being chased by a group of 2nd-level blood-sucking spirit mosquitoes whose names we can't tell. We don't know where they are running to. We shouldn't be able to go back in a short time. We are currently running out. Zhou Daocheng's face was heavy. It was too coincidental that the two forces encountered second-level monsters at the same time, which made the situation worse. But now it seems that the current environment is indeed dangerous, and the number of powerful monsters has increased dramatically, even making it difficult for the three forces to resist. Moreover, Lin Xiaoyuan was attacked by a group of second-level mosquitoes, and he ran away directly without even having time to send a communication, which means that the situation must be very critical. On the other hand, the Spirit Snake sect has not responded, which also makes Zhou Daocheng upset. In order to ensure their own safety, Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai did not dare to act rashly and retreated to the rear, as far away from this second-stage intermediate butterfly monster as possible. And around, they began to look for traces of the Earthly Evil sect and the Spirit Snake sect. No matter what the situation was, at least find the allies first, or determine the next direction of action. Not long after, Zhou Daocheng found the traces left by the Earthly Evil sect. A lot of blood was spilled on the dead leaves. There were also several corpses wearing Earthly Evil sect costumes around, and a series of messy footprints. It seemed that the situation was very urgent at the time. At the same time, several giant mosquitoes more than 1 meter long were found in the swamp pond not far away. They looked hideous and terrifying, much more terrifying than the purple armored swallowing spirit ants, and their half-meter-long mouthparts were stained with blood. Zhou Daocheng searched along the footsteps and found that the Earthly Evil sect had completely gone far away. It should not be caught up in a short time, so he could only sigh helplessly and give up. Finally, traces of the Spirit Snake sect were found in an area not far away. Compared to the sudden attack on the Disha sect, the Lingxi sect did not seem to be in any danger. There were only neat footsteps on the ground, but when the footsteps reached a certain pond, they disappeared completely. When I looked up, I found that the miasma around me was extremely dense, as if it was steaming water vapor. You were in the dim forest, exuding a mysterious and terrifying atmosphere. Although he did not feel the danger obviously, Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but shudder and took a step back. On the side, Zhou Daobai couldn't help frowning and said, "Misfortunes never come alone." It seems that the Lingxi sect is also in trouble. I didn't expect that I would encounter danger again after walking for half a day. Zhou Daocheng also sighed helplessly, with a trace of fear in his eyes. In such a short time, he encountered big monsters one after another, and the whereabouts of the Lingxi sect were unknown, which made him more and more afraid of the 100 insects poison swamp. What should I do next? Retreat? Or continue to move forward? Zhou Daobai looked at the surrounding environment and felt more and more weird, and asked. Zhou Daocheng thought for a while and tried to use the Wu Earth spiritual qi to see the situation around him. After only 2 seconds, his face changed suddenly, and then he quickly turned his head to look in all directions. Seeing this scene, the eldest brother Zhou Daobai couldn't help frowning, carefully looking at the surrounding environment, and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" Zhou Daocheng's breathing became heavy, and he said in a deep voice, "The environment here is different from when we first came." Zhou Daobai's sword eyebrows moved, and he said in disbelief, "How is it possible? We didn't move at all. Is there a formation here?" Zhou Daocheng thought about it, but finally shook his head. "Impossible. If there is a formation, I will more or less notice the abnormality, and it is absolutely impossible to find nothing. Indeed, if it is a powerful formation like the natural maze of the Fog Valley, it can change the terrain silently, but as a second-level formation master, if you want Zhou Daocheng to be completely unaware, it must be at least a third-level top-grade formation." But Zhou Daocheng doesn't think that the situation here is a formation. After carefully checking the surroundings, Zhou Daocheng found that the miasma around him was getting thicker and thicker. He did not make any movement, but the surrounding environment was constantly changing. Other people around him had obviously noticed this. Meng Yushan, Lin Yuan and others had sweat on their foreheads. They all gathered together and had noticed that something was wrong here. Zhou Daocheng felt even more regretful, secretly saying that he was not careful. When he found that the Spirit Snake sect disappeared for no reason, he should have left the area immediately instead of staying there. Now it seems that the situation here is indeed a bit troublesome. Just by approaching here, he was directly trapped in it, and he did not notice anything unusual. Perhaps, the Spirit Snake sect at that time also encountered the same situation. Zhou Daocheng looked grim. Facing such a strange situation, he did not dare to act rashly. After exchanging a glance with Zhou Daobai, he was also a little undecided and asked, "What should we do?" Zhou Daobai shook his head, sweat on his temples. "I don't know, I don't understand the situation, and I don't have a way to deal with it. How about Withdrawing. Let's give it a try. The two of them had no other options, but they knew that staying in the same place was definitely not a solution, and they might fall into a more dangerous situation. So after thinking for a long time, they still tried to retreat and tried to return from the original route, but when they looked back, they found that the road behind them was also shrouded in miasma. And what was even more special was that he could not see any footprints from the way he came. Zhou Daocheng was sweating profusely, swallowed his saliva, and resolutely walked in the direction he came from. Passing through layers of fog, the whole forest was silent, so quiet that it was frightening. There was no sound of insects or birds, and even the wind had stopped, without any sound. Only when everyone walked, their feet made friction sounds in the mud. No one spoke either. In the current situation, everyone was nervous. I didn't want to get out of this weird area as soon as possible. But the situation is often not as expected. 2 whole days. The group walked in the thick miasma for 2 whole days. The surrounding situation kept changing, but the only thing that remained unchanged was the extremely thick miasma. Fortunately, the miasma here is non-toxic, otherwise, with the cultivation of a qi refining cultivator, without enough detoxification pills, he would probably die in the toxins of the miasma. Finally, when he saw the night was getting dark again, Zhou Daocheng stopped directly and dared not continue to move. We can't go any further, or the situation will only get worse. Zhou Daocheng looked up at the dense jungle, feeling extremely depressed. Zhou Daobai nodded and said, let's set up the Earth Spirit House. The situation is a bit complicated now, so we can't act rashly. In the back, the atmosphere of the 5 hunting teams led by Meng Yushin and others was extremely depressing. Although no one died, the atmosphere was even more depressing than that of the dead. Everyone was silent and began to arrange the Earth Spirit House. When the Earth Yellow formation was built, everyone entered the Earth House and saw the familiar Earth Spirit House room. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief and seemed to feel a sense of security. Being able to see the familiar cave in a completely unfamiliar environment gave everyone some spiritual comfort. It seemed that only by hiding in it could the fear in their hearts be relieved. Even Zhou Daocheng felt a little relieved inexplicably, because this special area was so weird that he was completely confused. When standing still, the surrounding environment changed by itself and was completely out of control. After starting to move, he found that he could not get out of the miasma area at all, and could only be forced to circle in it. Moreover, the dead silence here was also very special, which aroused the most original fear in people's hearts. Therefore, Zhou Daocheng still felt that it was safer to hide in the small house of the Earth Spirit. It was at least safer to stay still than to wander around. At the same time, Zhou Daocheng, Zhou Daobai, and the 5 hunting team captains gathered in a room and talked with low eyes. Zhou Daobai sighed deeply and said, Lord of the Fog Valley, can you see the clues of the environment here? Zhou Daocheng shook his head. It's too special. It's not a formation. It should be a pure natural environment. I can't understand the changes at all. Then, he looked at the others and asked, did you find anything? Meng Yushin and others shook their heads and said, no, it seems that there is no danger here, and I haven't even seen the monsters, but the feeling in the dark makes me tremble all over, as if there is a great danger hidden around. Everyone was silent. This was the most intuitive feeling. Even if he faced a second-stage late-stage monster directly, Zhou Daocheng would not be too scared. What was really scary was the unknown, the complete lack of understanding, and the inability to grasp the surrounding situation. At this moment, everyone seemed to be trapped in a fog, and they couldn't see what they had encountered at all, which was the most terrifying thing. After a long silence, the eldest brother Zhou Daobai looked at Zhou Daocheng and asked, what are your plans? Should we continue to rush to find an exit, or stay where we are? After thinking for a moment, Zhou Daocheng said, we can't continue to wander around, otherwise we may get deeper and deeper and never get out. Let's stop first and think about it from beginning to end. Is there anything we haven't noticed? Didn't notice this. Everyone fell into deep thought, thinking hard for a long time, but there was no clear answer. Lin Yuan touched his chin and suddenly said ambiguously, I did find something, but I don't know if it's right. Zhou Daocheng's eyes lit up and said, whether it's right or not, tell me first, maybe it's useful. Lin Yuan scratched his head and said, I walked in this forest for 2 days, the speed was not fast, but I took 2 pills to restore my spiritual energy in the middle. And, I feel a little hungry now. Everyone was stunned and suddenly confused. Meng Yushin scratched his head and said awkwardly, it's better not to say it, you were right, I seem to feel very tired these 2 days, but I am also hungry. It seems to be a little bit, and in this forest, the speed of mana consumption is also much faster. I wonder what's going on. It may be necessary to block the miasma. It is understandable to consume more mana, and it is possible to consume more mana if you are always tense. Quote. They could only talk to each other, and Zhou Daocheng also listened carefully, as if he had sensed something from it. He couldn't help but mutter to himself, it consumes more mana. It's easy to get hungry. What's the reason? He was also constantly thinking about the process along the way. What everyone said today was indeed correct. In theory, everyone present was at least at the 9th level of qi refining. Although they had not reached the level of fasting, they also had a lot of mana in their bodies, enough to support a long period of not eating. What's more, in the past 2 days, they were just walking every day, and there was no fighting at all. How could the mana be consumed so quickly? Although he was puzzled, Zhou Daocheng did not find a reasonable explanation. The meeting lasted for more than an hour, and everyone just chatted casually, and did not come up with a reasonable answer at all. In the end, Zhou Daocheng had no choice but to end the meeting and let everyone eat and drink as much as possible to replenish their physical strength. Afterwards, after explaining to his eldest brother Zhou Daobai, Zhou Daocheng directly began to retreat alone. No matter what situation you face, strength is the most important factor. As long as your own strength is strong enough, your safety will naturally increase. Especially recently, the first set of spirit puppet array has been destroyed, and the spotted viper and the black-eyed ghost-scaled snake can no longer be used, which greatly reduces Zhou Daocheng's strength. Although he still has another set of spirit puppet array, for safety reasons, he decided to refine another set. It just so happens that the essence of Blood Fang Wild Boar and Purple Flame Spirit Cat can be used to make a more powerful spirit puppet array. The Blood-Fanged Wild Boar, originally with strength comparable to the 3rd level of foundation building, if it is made into a spirit puppet, its strength should be able to barely reach the 2nd level of foundation building, but the physical strength is relatively weak. After all, the quality of the black puppet wood is relatively low. The strength of the Purple Flame Spirit Cat should be relatively less weakened, because it does not rely on its own strong physique, but relies on agility and demon fire to fight. If 2 cat eyes are refined into the spirit puppet during the refining process, so that the Purple Flame Spirit Cat can still use demon fire, then its strength will not be reduced too much. Zhou Daocheng conservatively estimated that it should be able to barely reach the 3rd level of foundation building. In this way, a blood-toothed wild boar with strength comparable to the 2nd level of foundation building, plus a Purple Flame Spirit Cat that barely reached the 3rd level of foundation building, must be an extremely powerful force. Zhou Daocheng did not hesitate to go into seclusion and began to improve his own strength. But others were far from being so at ease. Even if they lived in the Earth Spirit House, they still felt extremely insecure and kept an eye on the situation outside at all times. The same was true for the eldest brother Zhou Daobai. He had to send people to guard the night every day and night to avoid any unexpected situations, and at the same time further detect the surrounding environment. It turned out that the surrounding soil was no different, and the surrounding miasma was nothing special. Everything seemed very ordinary, but they just couldn't get out. Seeing that Zhou Daocheng was so arrogant and started practicing in seclusion, Zhou Daobai could only sigh helplessly and stay here temporarily. A full 10 days passed without any danger. Everyone stayed in the Tuling Lodge peacefully, waiting for Zhou Daocheng to leave seclusion. After 10 days of hard work, Zhou Daocheng finally lived up to expectations and successfully refined a brand new spirit puppet formation. Moreover, it is the most powerful spiritual puppet formation so far. It can almost make Zhou Daocheng directly comparable to the strong men at the 3rd level of qi refining with his cultivation of the 1st level of foundation building. Even the Purple Flame Spirit Cat alone is enough for him to fight against the 3rd level of foundation building. Zhou Daocheng's face showed joy. He was now in a dangerous environment. The improvement of his strength might bring new opportunities, and he might find a way out. Looking at the Purple Flame Spirit Cat in the formation, Zhou Daocheng suddenly felt an itch in his heart. He tried to control the spirit puppet himself and wanted to experience the strength of the 3rd level of foundation building. The Purple Flame Spirit Cat is a very special spirit puppet that can use demonic fire. However, when Zhou Daocheng's consciousness first entered the Purple Flame Civet, he had a vague feeling of strangeness, as if the surrounding environment had a sense of illusion. At first, Zhou Daocheng didn't pay much attention to it, thinking that it was more difficult to control the 3rd level foundation building spirit puppet and that it consumed a lot of his own energy. However, when Zhou Daocheng controlled The body of the purple flame civet turned around, and after seeing its own body, it stopped suddenly and stared blankly at its own body, faintly aware that something was wrong. After just looking at it for a few seconds, I couldn't help but sweat. After swallowing, I vaguely realized that something was wrong. It turns out to be like this. No wonder I didn't notice anything unusual. Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but murmur to himself, and finally, in order to confirm his suspicion, he directly controlled the body of the spirit puppet, left the retreat room, and came to the tooling hut. When he looked at the others, he was completely sure of what he was thinking. In the eyes of the purple flame spirit cat, he discovered that his body had always had its eyes closed. Of course, this was not the most important thing, because when the consciousness left the body and controlled the spirit puppet, it was understandable for the body to close its eyes. However, the purple flame civet's cat eyes had certain mental abilities, which allowed him to vaguely realize that his body was not just closing his eyes, but was in a weaker coma. This situation is very special. Even if he is controlling the spirit puppet, it is absolutely impossible for him to be in a semi-conscious state. When he left the retreat room and saw the other people in the tooling lodge, his suspicion was completely confirmed, because everyone had their eyes closed and they were all in a slight coma. Everyone is not awake at all. Zhou Daocheng only felt that his scalp was numb, goosebumps appeared all over his body, and the hairs on his body stood on end. There was only one question in my mind: when exactly? When did they fall into a semi-coma state? Could it be that they were also in a semi-coma state during the 2 days they walked in the forest? So is everything they perceive and see real? They walked back for 2 days, but did they really go back? Zhou Daocheng kept thinking, and felt more and more fear in his heart. Under this silent influence, they were likely to die completely, and they might even be in a semi-coma for the rest of their lives and never be able to get out. When he discovered the cause of the incident, Zhou Daocheng tried his best to suppress the fear in his heart and began to try to wake himself up. Now it is almost certain that it is not the so-called formation, but a unique environmental influence that affects everyone's spirit. Therefore, the best way is to use mental abilities to solve it. Zhou Daocheng controlled the purple flame cat spirit puppet and began to rummage through his storage bag, trying to find items that could stimulate his spirit. In the end, I only found the black jade soul nurturing wood and spirit binding crystal. Although these two heavenly and earthly treasures cannot be completely regarded as spiritual items, they are still somewhat contaminated. In addition, the purple flame civet itself should also have some spiritual attributes. Therefore, after Zhou Daocheng thought for a long time, he placed all the black jade soul nurturing and soul binding crystals next to his own body, trying to influence himself. Then, he used the purple flame civet's eyes to release purple flames, wrapping his body. This is an extremely dangerous behavior. The demon fire on the 3rd level of foundation building may directly burn the monks on the 1st level of foundation building. However, Zhou Daocheng's situation is different, because he has extremely strong defense and is also protected by a higher quality red snake tattoo. So in an instant, the red snake tattoo was activated immediately, and a huge wave covered the whole body, making the main body with closed eyes couldn't help but frown at this moment. It works. Zhou Daocheng was pleasantly surprised and quickly seized this opportunity. Seeing that he had feelings, he immediately returned his spirit to his body and tried his best to sense the changes in his body. When he regained consciousness, he found that he should still be in a coma, because when he opened his eyes, he did not find any flames on his body, he just felt a little hot. This shows that there is a strange spiritual energy that is affecting his perception. Now that the abnormality has been discovered, he will definitely not follow the wrong perception, but will try his best to feel the changes in his body. Finally, at a certain moment, it seemed that countless time had passed, and I saw the light in an instant. When I opened my eyes, I saw the red flame and the purple flame intertwined together, and they all became real. I finally woke up. Zhou Daocheng rubbed his sore and swollen temples, and felt extremely tired, as if he had slept for a long time, but this sleep did not restore his physical strength, but consumed all the energy in his body, as if he was hollowed out. Until this moment, when he felt the extremely real body and the clear sight in his eyes, Zhou Daocheng really understood that he had completely escaped the control of this special mental attack. And it was at this moment that many questions that I couldn't figure out before had answers at this moment. Why did everyone not move, and the surrounding environment was still changing? The greater possibility was not that the surrounding environment changed, but that he had fallen into an illusion at that time and was in a semi-comatose state, so when he looked at the surrounding environment, he thought it had changed. In fact, everything around him had never changed, only people had changed. As for why he couldn't get out, in fact, it is very simple. You are traveling while semi-conscious. Although you are walking back, who can know which direction you are going? Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. They probably walked towards the depths of the 100-insect poison swamp for 2 full days. As for where they are now, no one knows. Fortunately, we stopped in time. If we keep going, who knows where we will end up? Zhou Daocheng was secretly frightened. After suppressing the palpitations in his heart, Zhou Daocheng looked outside the retreat with deep eyes. No matter what happened, the most important thing now is to help everyone recover. Now that you can regain your sanity and break away from this kind of mental control, it is possible to escape from this dangerous area. Zhou Daocheng came to Tuling Lodge. The strange scene made his hair stand on end, because everyone, whether it was his eldest brother Zhou Daobai or the members of the 5 hunting teams, all had their eyes closed and were doing various things in Tuling Lodge. Some people stood guard facing the wall with their eyes closed, seemingly very serious. There are also people eating, but they are not taking anything. There is no food, they are just facing the air. They are all in a state of half asleep and half awake, which is similar to sleepwalking to be precise. They are in a fantasy. Everything is unreal, but everything in the fantasy is based on reality. For example, the conversations they had on the road were actually real. Everyone talked with their eyes closed, hurried on the road with their eyes closed, and lived in the Tuling Lodge with their eyes closed. Even the illusions they saw each other were the same. However, everything that happens in the fantasy is not real. For example, it seems that you have eaten, but in fact you have not. It seems that the environment is ever changing, but in fact it is not. This is a very magical state, and Zhou Daocheng can only describe it as conscious sleepwalking. Without thinking too much, Zhou Daocheng began to try to wake up others. This is relatively easier, at least easier than waking yourself up. Because the spiritual method is a spiritual method, especially for Meng Yushan and others, they are already controlled by the spiritual method, and there is a ray of Zhou Daocheng's spirit in their minds. Zhou Daocheng can directly stimulate them, and they can recover from the coma. Recover. What's more, he was only in a slight coma, half asleep and half awake, so it was relatively easier to wake him up. Zhou Daocheng only slightly stimulated the spirits in their minds. Meng Yushan and Lin Yuan frowned, and soon opened their eyes. When their consciousness recovered from their trance and saw the situation in front of them clearly, they immediately looked at their hands in disbelief. Sir, this is. Zhou Daocheng didn't say much, motioning for them to rest first, and then started to wake up several others. The first is the eldest brother Zhou Daobai. Zhou Daocheng also used the secret method to condense into a small needle and gently pricked Zhou Daobai's spirit. With only a slight external influence, he recovered easily and slowly opened his eyes. Others were in the same situation, and they all recovered after being slightly stimulated. When everyone opened their eyes and looked tiredly at their surroundings, they all vaguely understood something. The eldest brother Zhou Daobai showed a hint of panic when he complained at the end of the year, and said, "Are we falling into an illusion?" Zhou Daocheng nodded slightly. Zhou Daobai said in disbelief, "How is it possible? When did we fall into the illusion? Why haven't we noticed it?" This question is also the biggest doubt for others. After Zhou Daocheng thought for a moment, he speculated, perhaps when we were looking for traces of the spirit snake sect, we had slowly fallen into the illusion. When we stayed in place and the environment began to change unconsciously, the illusion was completely established, but I just didn't notice it. It should be true. After all, since then, some strange problems have begun to appear. Zhou Daobai nodded in agreement. The footprints of the spirit snake sect members suddenly disappeared, the illusion suddenly changed, the miasma became thicker. All the changes occurred at that time. Meng Yushan said with lingering fear, "We just closed our eyes and stayed in the poisonous swamp for half a month. It should be 2 days. After leaving for 2 days at first, we stayed in the Tuling Lodge." Lin Yuan explained. Meng Yushan exclaimed, "Fortunately, Master has the foresight, otherwise if we had to walk here for half a month, we might not survive now." The rest of the people also nodded. Running around in this situation was tantamount to courting death. Zhou Daocheng also felt lucky. If it weren't for the purple flame spirit cat, it might be difficult for him to find himself in an illusion in a few months. In fact, it is not very difficult to escape from the illusion. What is really difficult is how to find out that you are in the illusion. The most terrifying illusion is not to fall completely into a deep sleep, but to fall into a completely unbelievable environment. The really scary thing is that you are half asleep, half awake, a fantasy that seems real and fake, based on reality, but slightly different from reality. You can't see any problems, and you even think that everything in the fantasy is reality. Even after waking up, I found that the environment in the fantasy world was actually not much different from the environment in reality. This was the most terrifying thing. However, I finally came out of the illusion, and my safety was guaranteed. After everyone had a brief chat, they walked out of Tuling's hut and looked at the real environment around them. Looking around, there is an extremely dense jungle, and the giant trees that cover the sky completely block the light in the sky, making it look extremely dark. This is no different from the illusion, but the only difference is that the miasma floating in the forest has changed a lot, showing colorful colors, which looks magnificent. Moreover, Zhou Daocheng only smelled it lightly and found that this colorful miasma was very special, and seemed to have some hallucinogenic effects. After checking, Zhou Daobai said, "It seems that this colorful miasma made us fall into a coma. It is really hard to guard against. It should not only be miasma, but there may be other factors, otherwise we would not fall into the illusion without noticing." Zhou Daocheng speculated. Not long after, Zhou Daocheng found a lot of white flocculent flowers growing close to the ground in the surrounding grass, which were constantly releasing white miasma. However, when the miasma enters the air, it will change into colorful colors, which is extremely gorgeous and beautiful. This is a special spiritual plant that he has never seen before, which also makes him extremely curious. But he found that the miasma emitted by this white flocculent flower did not seem to have any hallucinogenic effect. Only when it was floating in the air and turned into colorful miasma, it would have a very weak hallucinogenic effect. Zhou Daocheng discovered the secret after careful observation. In addition to this flocculent flower, there is another special spiritual plant around, a purple vine wrapped around the tree branches. This vine releases a special kind of pollen into the air, which is completely non-toxic and harmless. However, when it touches the white flocculent flowers, the two sides will react, thus producing a hallucinogenic effect. This hallucinogenic effect is not very effective, but it is extremely easy to be affected, and it is difficult to recover from the illusion, just like everyone before. Even after everyone stood in the forest for only a few breaths, someone was affected by the colorful miasma and his eyes were about to close. Fortunately, Zhou Daocheng discovered it in time and slapped him to wake him up, which prevented him from falling into the illusion. Faced with such a situation, Zhou Daocheng decisively ordered, "Everyone use magic power to attach to the nose to avoid breathing the colorful miasma." At the same time, 3 people in a group, if you find that other people have signs of falling into the illusion, immediately wake them up. Everyone did it immediately without any doubt, wrapped the aura around the nose, and blew away the colorful miasma that could get close. In this way, the influence of the colorful miasma was immediately alleviated, allowing everyone to move smoothly. At this time, Zhou Daocheng began to determine his current location and tried to leave here. If possible, he also needed to look for the disappeared spirit snake sect. If there were no accidents, the spirit snake sect would most likely be affected by the 5-color miasma and encounter the same situation as them. However, after observing the surrounding situation, the eldest brother Zhou Daobai discovered a not-so-good situation. That is, the location of everyone should have been completely deep into the 100 insects poison swamp. Zhou Daobai frowned and speculated. "We should have walked a long way in the first 2 days, and we might even have used spiritual energy to travel at that time. Now we are very deep. It will take a lot of time to go back." Zhou Daocheng also nodded and said, "Then explore slowly. Anyway, the 5-color miasma can't affect us, and there are not many other dangers in this area. Just walk back slowly. Everyone can walk safely here for 2 days without encountering any danger, which means that there should be no other dangers in this area except the 5-color miasma." Zhou Daocheng no longer hesitated, and led the team to move forward, and began to look for natural treasures and monsters. The more special the area, the more likely it is to have precious natural treasures. Zhou Daocheng is unwilling to give up such an opportunity. After walking for almost half a day, Zhou Daocheng stopped. In the jungle not far away, there was a huge tiger walking slowly in the jungle. It was powerful and heavy. It had already reached the middle stage of the 2nd level, equivalent to the 4th to 5th level of foundation building. Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai immediately became serious. It was very dangerous to encounter a tiger monster in the jungle, not to mention a monster with the strength of the middle stage of the 2nd level. If it was a tiger monster familiar with the terrain, it would be possible to easily kill several strong men in the middle stage of foundation building with superb hunting skills. With such strength, facing Zhou Daocheng and others in the early stage of foundation building, it was simply a piece of cake. Just as the two were sweating and alert to the tiger, Zhou Daocheng suddenly glanced at the monster's closed eyes. The next moment, Zhou Daocheng immediately showed a look of surprise, and lowered his voice and said, "This monster seems to have fallen into an illusion." Zhou Daobai had also discovered the situation, and his eyes lit up, with a look of relief on his face. It seems that this kind of five-colored miasma is not only useful for cultivators but also for monsters. After noticing this, Zhou Daocheng's heart was pounding, and a look of surprise appeared in his eyes. If the five-colored miasma is also effective for monsters, does it mean that there are many monsters trapped in illusions in this five-colored miasma? Zhou Daocheng swallowed his saliva and said speculatively, "This is very likely." Zhou Daocheng vaguely discovered that he seemed to have found a treasure. This land of five-colored miasma is not only a dangerous area, but also seems to be a natural hunting ground. If you can sneak attack these monsters trapped in illusions, you can easily kill them. I want to obtain a large amount of monster materials. Thinking of this, Zhou Daocheng no longer hesitated and said directly, "Brother, this is a good opportunity. Let's join forces to sneak attack this monster. If it has no reaction at all, I should have a certain chance of winning." After thinking for a moment, Zhou Daobai finally gritted his teeth and said, "Okay." A large number of formations were taken out and placed around to restrict the actions of this monster. In addition, the giant ridge bow was also taken out and attacked from the rear, while Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai were restraining it from the front. Zhou Daocheng went all out, without any reservation, and directly arranged two sets of spirit puppet formations, and used the snake bone spirit formation at the same time. This was his most powerful state. Soon, 4 spirit puppets appeared in front of him. One of them was a corrupted poison armor lizard and a frost poison toad. Both were relatively weak, equivalent to the strength of the first level of foundation building. But in the other spirit puppet formation, there were extremely powerful blood-toothed wild boars and purple flame spirit cats, with very good combat power. On the other side, the eldest brother Zhou Daobai was also ready, holding a bone sword in his hand, and the sword intent began to gather. It was at this moment that the demon tiger walking in the bushes seemed to sense a strong breath and suddenly stopped, looked around vigilantly, and finally looked in the direction of Zhou Daobai. Seeing this scene, Zhou Daocheng frowned slightly, but did not give up the plan to surround and kill it. Instead, he lowered his voice and said, "Take action, as long as it is still in the illusion, we will have the advantage." Although the scene in the illusion is based on reality, if reality changes, the illusion will naturally change. That is to say, when Zhou Daocheng and others were besieging, the monsters were also fighting in the illusion, but the scenes seen by both sides were slightly different. But only these slight differences were needed to give Zhou Daocheng and others an advantage. Zhou Daocheng's eyes condensed, and he pinched the magic formula in his hand. The snake bone spirit formation was activated immediately. A large number of thick and sharp snake bones rose from the ground and surrounded the monster tiger to control his actions. The monster tiger noticed the changes around him and began to roar continuously, but his eyes were still closed, and he didn't realize that he was still in the illusion. The 4 spirit puppets have also gradually approached, surrounding the monster tiger from 4 directions, preparing for a sneak attack. On the other side, Zhou Daobai's breath has been condensed to the extreme. After nodding to Zhou Daocheng, he let the true energy flow into the white bone sword. The breath of desire wandered around, with a hint of bursting anger. This is the method of the Yin Sha sword, which can condense anger and integrate it into the sword technique, thereby displaying powerful sword skills. Generally speaking, the greater the anger of the caster, the greater the power of the angry sword, which is a point that all people who practice this sword technique take for granted. However, Zhou Daobai did not do so. If he used his own anger as nourishment, sooner or later, he would be controlled by the increasingly strong anger in the sword technique, and eventually become obsessed, just like the former elder of the Xuanian sect. Zhou Daobai's anger was obtained from the enemy and accumulated in the sword technique, and it would not affect his emotions. Although the power of this method would be relatively weaker, it is obviously safer and easier to master the sword technique, so as not to be controlled by the sword technique. As the sword intent condensed and the breath reached its peak, Zhou Daobai directly stabbed out with a sword, stabbing at the abdomen of the demon tiger at an extremely tricky angle. Because of the extremely fast speed, the demon tiger in the illusion had no time to react at all. The long sword directly cut a huge hole in its tough skin, and blood gushed out. The shrill roar resounded through the sky, shaking the surrounding trees. However, it was still in the illusion at this time, and the changes in the illusion would not completely refer to reality. Even if the demon tiger struggled and resisted quickly, it was still difficult to effectively repel Zhou Daobai. At this moment, Zhou Daobai gently hooked the white bone long sword, and the sword intent on the sword peak quickly collected the anger from the demon tiger in a tricky way, instantly making the sword energy more powerful, with a faint red breath. In this way, not only did Zhou Daobai's strength become stronger, but it also soothed the demon tiger's emotions to a certain extent and reduced its anger. Take advantage of its illness to kill it. After Zhou Daobai was injured, Zhou Daocheng naturally did not want to fall behind, and then attacked to surround and kill. The first to attack were the 5 captains of the hunting team. They directly used the Golden Spear 100-vine formation. Dense and thick vines emerged from the ground and entangled the 4 tiger paws of the demon tiger. At the same time, Zhou Daocheng also controlled the snake bone spirit formation, which grew out from all directions and controlled the demon tiger like a cage. In a breath, the movement of the demon tiger was directly restricted. No matter how fiercely it tore, it would not have much effect, because both the thorny vines and snake bones could continue to grow. Although the strength was not high enough and was easily torn and destroyed, the number of vines was enough to make the demon tiger defenseless. During this short control time, Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai got another chance to attack. Zhou Daobai still used swordsmanship. The angry sword was used for the second time. The white bones were surrounded by a light red anger, like an arrow passing through the air, leaving a light red flame tail, and pierced into the demon tiger's abdomen again. This time, the purpose was not to cut open, but to directly pierce the abdomen and attack the internal organs. This fatal blow immediately made the demon tiger feel threatened in life, and roared to the sky again, struggling hard. He actually broke free from all the formations with his terrifying strength. No, this beast wants to escape. The demon tiger did not fight back because of anger, but after feeling the threat of life and death, it quickly began to flee to the forest behind. Zhou Daocheng looked indifferent and said, "Don't worry, I'll do it." In the spirit puppet formation, 4 spirit puppets quickly took action and rushed forward without hesitation, especially the blood-toothed wild boar, which was no smaller than the demon tiger. It directly collided from the side and stopped the demon tiger with a strong force. A woo! The painful wail echoed. Zhou Daocheng personally controlled the giant ridge bow without a trace of mercy, and the flaming arrow was aimed at the pain point. One arrow shot into the wound on the abdomen, further expanding the injury. Then, the red snake tattoo on Zhou Daocheng's body surged, and the rose-red flame was hit by a palm and directly poured into the belly of the demon tiger. At the same time, the purple flame spirit cat made a move in tacit understanding, and purple flames appeared in its eyes. It was also stuffed into the belly of the demon tiger like Zhou Daocheng. At this moment, the flaming arrow, the red snake flame, and the purple flame all happened to enter the belly of the demon tiger. The incompatible flames began to entangle and collide inside. The demon tiger, which was originally knocked to the ground, suddenly bounced up from the ground, roaring and wailing, shaking its body, trying to get rid of the flames in its abdomen. However, there was no effect. Zhou Daocheng clearly saw that in the huge wound in the abdomen, there was a faint strong fire, sometimes red, sometimes purple, and the strong energy was constantly colliding in it. After a few breaths last time, a small explosion occurred directly, and the entire wound was charred black. Seeing this scene, Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. This seemed a bit too cruel. However, the effect of the collision of the 3 flames was something he had never expected. It could actually produce such terrible energy, even not weaker than some spells. The demon tiger, which was already seriously injured, jumped around for a while, then fell down with a thud, gasping for breath, and black smoke came out of the wound on his abdomen, which was already very weak. Seeing this, the eldest brother Zhou Daobai was very disappointed and said distressed, "This is the material of a second-level middle-grade demon beast. The entire abdominal cavity was burned, how many spirit stones must be lost?" Zhou Daocheng smiled and said, "There is no other way. After all, it is a demon beast equivalent to the 5th level of foundation building. It is good enough to be killed." Zhou Daobai sighed and understood the reason. The fact that everyone was able to kill this demon beast was largely due to the 5-colored miasma. This battle was almost like the demon tiger fighting with its eyes closed, and it could not put up any effective resistance. If it was in its prime, I'm afraid everyone would not be its opponent at all. Because the difference in strength was too great, this was a demon beast equivalent to the 5th level of foundation building, and could easily kill a cultivator at the 3rd level of foundation building. But with the help of the 5-colored miasma, it didn't even have a chance to escape. Looking at the dying demon tiger on the ground, which didn't open its eyes until it died, Zhou Daocheng really felt the horror of the 5-colored miasma. As long as you don't realize that you are in an illusion, you will never wake up, and even think that everything in the illusion is real. Perhaps, in the illusion of this demon beast, it also encountered a battle, and in this battle it was completely suppressed, thinking that it had encountered a stronger opponent. But in reality, there was only a group of cultivators who were weaker than it. Zhou Daocheng sighed, walked forward, completely ended the life of the demon tiger, and then began to collect materials. This was the strongest monster they had hunted so far. It was beyond their capabilities and it was impossible to kill it. Moreover, it was a tiger-like monster, with treasures all over its body. Almost all the monster materials were priceless. When Zhou Daocheng got closer to check, he could see the species of this monster. It was a very rare, golden bone tiger, a monster known for its strong physique. This 2nd-level monster is very special. It does not use magic. It is a pure body refining monster and has extremely strong bones. Even if it is not refined by means, its strength can be comparable to that of a 2nd-level magic weapon. The essence of the golden bone tiger is all condensed in its bones. It is an extremely precious monster material and can be said to be priceless. Not only can it be used to refine magic weapons, but it can also be refined into a kind of elixir called, by Lian Jinji Yudan, which is of great benefit to body refining cultivators. The bones of this whole golden bone tiger are enough to refine 3 to 4 furnaces of elixirs, which can be used together with the body refining technique, Zhanyan body refining technique, to greatly increase the speed of body refining. Zhou Daocheng collected them all and put them in the storage bag. This precious material must not be exchanged for contribution points, and should be brought back to the Fog Valley Treasure House. In addition, the tiger skin and flesh of the golden bone tiger are also extremely precious materials, containing very rich energy. After use, it can strengthen the bones and muscles, and it is also a rare treasure. There is almost no useless part on the whole body, all of which can be eaten or refined. The only pity is that due to the burning of the red snake flame and the purple flame, a large amount of flesh and blood inside the abdominal cavity was burned, and even some organs were burned into charcoal. In desperation, this part of flesh and blood was taken directly, and after a simple grilling, it was distributed to everyone present. Many people in the hunting team were exhausted after hunting these days, and they could just eat the flesh and blood of the 2nd-level monster to replenish energy and restore physical strength and spirit. However, the flesh and blood of the 2nd-level middle-stage gold refining bone tiger contains extremely huge energy, so for most Qi refining cultivators, only a small piece can be used. Because Lin Yuan ate one more piece, the spiritual energy was too full, and his face was flushed. He sat cross-legged on the spot and practiced the exercises. It took half an hour to absorb all the energy. But the benefits are also very obvious. The cultivation level that has already reached the late 9th level of Qi refining has been improved again, and it is one step closer to foundation building. The rest of the people were in a similar situation. Even if they ate less, they still needed to sit cross-legged and practice to fully absorb it. Only Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai ate a few more pieces because they were stronger. This kind of energy-rich flesh and blood is also very beneficial to them. After eating, Zhou Daocheng remembered to collect the essence of the golden bone tiger. Although it is not possible to use the essence of the 2nd-stage middle-stage monster to refine the spirit puppet formation at present, it can be stored and may be used in the future. However, when he tried to refine the essence, a disappointing situation occurred. The essence of the golden bone tiger was completely dead. It was not completely dissipated. The essence was still in the mind, but it had no consciousness at all, as if it was completely asleep. Zhou Daocheng used many methods to stimulate it, but there was no response at all. This essence has completely lost its activity. As for why this happened, Zhou Daocheng was not very clear, and he could only blame it on the 5-colored miasma. After all, what is the difference between the golden bone tiger and other monsters? The biggest difference is that when the golden bone tiger died, it was still in the illusion. Zhou Daocheng also felt a little regretful. Even if a 2nd-level middle-grade spirit essence could not be refined into a spirit puppet formation, it could be sold in the market for a lot of spirit stones. But now is not the time to feel regretful, because Zhou Daocheng found that the colorful miasma area is simply a treasure. Since the golden bone tiger will fall into the illusion and fall into this area, will there be other monsters falling into the illusion? Hunting these monsters that fall into the illusion does not require much effort, and the danger is relatively low, and the efficiency is simply terrifying. According to the strength, Zhou Daocheng and his party can only besiege monsters equivalent to the 4th level of foundation building at most. However, if they hunt monsters that fall into the illusion, they dare to touch even monsters equivalent to the 6th level of foundation building. Even if the hunt fails in the end, they can leave completely, and their own safety is sufficiently guaranteed. After considering these, Zhou Daocheng is no longer in a hurry to leave. Where is the dangerous area here? It's just a huge treasure trove. After cleaning up the body of the golden bone tiger, Zhou Daocheng set out again to continue looking for monsters. Now, he is no longer in a hurry to go out. He just wanders around here. What's more, the 5-color miasma area is not very dangerous, and he can even go deeper. In just a few days, he found several monsters trapped in the illusion again. Most of them are in the early stage of the 2nd stage. With the strength of several people, they can easily kill them. The harvest in these few days is almost richer than the harvest in the previous few months, and the hunting process is easier, and there are almost no injuries. Even the chi refining monks of the hunting team did not suffer any losses, because there are few dangerous poisons in the range of the 5-color miasma. Almost all of them are white flocculent flowers, and the 5-color miasma itself is more dangerous. However, Zhou Daocheng also found a problem in the hunting these days, that is, the spirits of the monsters killed in the illusion will die directly and lose their activity completely. Now it can be confirmed that it is the factor of the 5-color miasma that leads to such a result. This is a relatively large loss, but compared to the gains, this loss is not worth mentioning. A large amount of precious monster materials, whether used by oneself or exchanged for contribution points, can gain huge wealth. Zhou Daocheng also completely gave up the idea of returning, and went deep into the 5-colored miasma, constantly hunting 2nd-level monsters. According to his estimation, the current location has been completely deep into the range of about 1,000 miles of the 100 insects poison swamp, which is considered to have completely entered the East Great Wilderness vein, which is already a very dangerous area. Logically speaking, there should be a large number of 2nd-level late-stage monsters around, and even the 3rd-level monsters killed by the Wang family and the Tang family are not far away from here. Without the protection of the 5-colored miasma, it would be absolutely impossible for Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai to get close to the vicinity with their strength. Even recently, in the 5-colored miasma, I encountered a 2nd-level late-stage monster that was trapped in an illusion. This powerful monster, equivalent to the late stage of foundation building, even if it has fallen into an illusion, Zhou Daocheng definitely did not dare to take action, quietly bypassed it from behind, and continued to look for other monsters. In the 4th month, Zhou Daocheng had made a lot of money by hunting monsters trapped in illusions. The hunting rhythm has also become much easier. During the day, we search and hunt monsters, and at night, we rest in the Earth Spirit House. The only thing to note is that not everyone can sleep at the same time, because once you relax, you will inhale the 5-colored miasma. Even if you can't prevent it with the formation, there will still be a very small amount of 5-colored miasma that penetrates in, and it is easy to fall into an illusion, and the person who falls into the illusion will not notice it at all. Therefore, it is actually very difficult to survive in this area. Almost as long as you fall into the illusion, there is a 99% chance that you will stay here forever, and you will not even have the chance to discover the rules here, let alone survive here. So these days, Zhou Daocheng only sleeps once a week, and every time he sleeps, he will let his elder brother Zhou Daobai personally guard him by his side, using spiritual energy to protect his whole body to ensure that Zhou Daocheng will not be affected by the 5-colored miasma. Who made him the only one among all people who has spiritual means. Others can fall into illusions, but Zhou Daocheng can't. In this way, everyone survived in this strange area with such a troublesome way, constantly hunting wild beasts, and faintly became the existence at the top of the food chain in this area. As night fell, the whole forest became dim. Zhou Daocheng sat cross-legged in his room, and did not choose to sleep, but practiced silently. He reached the foundation building stage, and it would not hurt his body to not sleep for 10 days or half a month. While slowly practicing the technique to restore the spiritual energy consumed in the body, he secretly thought and counted the gains of the past few days in his heart. However, when the time came to midnight, Zhou Daocheng suddenly frowned, the pale yellow spiritual energy around him fluctuated slightly, and his calm eyes opened and looked in the direction outside the Earth Spirit House. he suddenly discovered a strange phenomenon. It seems that just now, I absorbed a wisp of pure spiritual energy. Zhou Daocheng whispered in surprise. In this area now, it is very difficult to absorb a wisp of pure and rich spiritual energy. The so-called pure and rich spiritual energy here does not refer to the spiritual energy floating in the air, but the spiritual energy near the spiritual vein. In nature, there is not rich spiritual energy floating, but it is generally more chaotic and can never compare to the spiritual energy in the spiritual vein. Before walking in the colorful miasma for several months, almost everyone used pills to restore spiritual energy, or relied on the spirit gathering array to slowly absorb the free spiritual energy in the air. But just now, Zhou Daocheng clearly noticed that he seemed to have absorbed a very pure spiritual energy, and the quality was not low. Could it be? There is a spiritual vein around here. Zhou Daocheng lowered his eyes and thought. In order to verify his guess, he continued to sit cross-legged and began to try to spread his own true energy. After about a quarter of an hour, Zhou Daocheng's eyes suddenly lit up, another ray. When he absorbed the second ray of pure spiritual energy, Zhou Daocheng had confirmed his guess that there must be an item around that can release pure spiritual energy. As for what the item is, Zhou Daocheng pondered in his heart and thought of several possibilities. First, there may be a spiritual vein or a spiritual spring around, which is the most likely. Second, it may also be a spiritual object of heaven and earth similar to purple qi green spirit bamboo, and wuling grass, that can release spiritual energy. No matter which one it is an extremely precious treasure, which made Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but get excited. However, he did not go out to look for it at the first time, but got up and left the room and knocked on the door of his eldest brother Zhou Daobai. There is no need to worry about disturbing the other party's practice, because now in the colorful miasma, everyone is resting with their eyes closed. After a cup of tea, Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai sat facing each other. Is there pure spiritual energy around? Zhou Daobai asked with some doubts, but also tried to release his own true energy, as if to confirm Zhou Daocheng's statement. But after a quarter of an hour, Zhou Daocheng slowly opened his eyes and shook his head. I didn't sense it, but it is also possible that your true energy covers a wider area and absorbs spiritual energy from farther away. How about we go and see the situation? After thinking for a while, Zhou Daocheng nodded and said, it is necessary to go and see, maybe there is a situation. Dare not be careless. If it is really a spiritual vein, or a spiritual object of heaven and earth that can release spiritual energy, the value it brings must be far beyond imagination. Such items are completely worth everyone's risky search. Even before everyone waited until dawn the next day, Zhou Daocheng chose to set off directly, woke up everyone, and walked towards the depths of the 100-insect poison swamp in the dark. But this walk took a whole night. Until dawn, when a few rays of sunlight began to penetrate the gaps between the dense treetops above, the source of the spiritual energy was still not found. But at noon, Zhou Daocheng caught a few wisps of pure spiritual energy again, and became more certain of his guess. At the same time, Zhou Daobai also unexpectedly sensed a wisp of pure spiritual energy. Although there was only one wisp, it immediately shocked his eyes and showed a look of surprise. After the two looked at each other, they continued to search in one direction. The deeper they went, the more pure spiritual energy they sensed. The two were almost certain that there must be something releasing spiritual energy here, and it was most likely a spiritual vein. Generally speaking, spiritual objects such as purple qi and green spirit bamboo release less spiritual energy, and it is impossible to transmit such a long distance. Only spiritual veins have such rich spiritual energy. At noon the next day, Zhou Daocheng stopped and looked at the spiritual energy that was gradually becoming richer in front of him, with a touch of joy in his eyes. It's right in front of us. Such a rich spiritual energy. After walking a few dozen steps forward and pushing aside a forest behind us, a deep lake appeared before our eyes. The lake was clear and rippling, surrounded by dense jungle, reflecting the green water surface. Because of the surrounding environment, this place seemed particularly quiet. There was a faint mist hanging over the lake, and there was no sound around it. This is a lake hidden deep in an unknown place. But this is normal. The location where everyone is now has truly reached the depths of the 100-insect poison swamp. Indeed, few monks have entered here. It is an area where no monk has ever been. What's even more surprising is that everyone can feel the extremely rich spiritual energy lingering on the lake. Through the layers of clouds, you can see a large island in the center of the lake. The spiritual energy is transmitted from the island. Zhou Daocheng said happily. It is really a spiritual vein, and it looks like the quality is definitely not low. It seems at least it has reached the second level of top grade. The eldest brother Zhou Daobai couldn't hide the joy on his face and said with a slight shock. The rest of the hunting team were breathing a little heavier at this moment. Such rich spiritual energy is even higher than the quality of the spiritual energy in Wugu, which is enough to show the value of this spiritual vein. Suddenly, Meng Yushin said in surprise, "Hey, look around this lake, there seems to be no colorful miasma." After being reminded like this, everyone immediately reacted. When they approached the lake, all the colorful miasma disappeared. Perhaps it cannot be said that it disappeared, but was blocked by spiritual energy and surrounded by the lake. But in the lake and on the islands in the center of the lake, there was only extremely rich spiritual energy and mist, and no colorful miasma could be seen at all. Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai looked at each other and saw the surprise in each other's eyes. It is definitely a precious paradise. Not only does it have a very high-quality spiritual vein, but more importantly, the location here is extremely safe. First of all, this place is deep into the 100 insect poison swamp. Even after the establishment of Donglinfang City, there should be very few forces entering such a deep area. After all, there are a large number of monsters around and the environment is extremely dangerous. Secondly, this meridian is surrounded by colorful miasma, which is a natural barrier that isolates all monsters and monks from outside, making this spiritual vein more secretive and difficult to be discovered by others. When Zhou Daocheng looked at the lake in front of him, only one thought came to his mind: a secret residence. This spiritual vein can be used as the Zhou family's deeply hidden residence, laying the foundation for the family to be passed down for hundreds of years. Since Tianqi Mountain was destroyed, the Zhou family has not found a new ancestral land. Deep Forest Mountain doesn't work, and Balan Lake doesn't work either. Even the Foggy Valley Mountains are not suitable as the family's ancestral land because of the establishment of the market. Without a stable ancestral land, the Zhou family will never be able to take root and sprout, and will never be able to return to its previous size. They can only drift in this world of immortality like rootless duckweed. But the spiritual vein in front of him can completely serve as the foundation of the Zhou family and provide nutrients for the family to grow and develop again. Moreover, now from the shore, the size of this island is really quite large, far from being comparable to the few small islands in Balan Lake. It is roughly estimated that the size of this island in the middle of the lake is probably equivalent to half of Balan Lake, which can fully support the survival of a large number of tribesmen. Conservative estimates suggest that housing tens of thousands of people is definitely not a problem. Zhou Daocheng suppressed the excitement in his heart, poured a basin of cold water on it and said, "Don't rush to celebrate yet, we have to explore the situation inside the island. If there is danger inside, I'm afraid." Hearing this, the others were also stunned. This worry was not unreasonable. In fact, such high-quality spiritual veins may have been occupied by other monsters. Or, if there is such a danger as the colorful miasma, it will be difficult to serve as a base. Everyone suppressed the joy on their faces and decided to check first and see the situation clearly before talking. Zhou Daocheng began to make arrangements, cut down the surrounding thick trees, made them into simple rafts, and began to try to cross the lake. There are now 35 members of the hunting team left, and there is exactly one raft for every 5 people, rowing forward end to end. As for Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai, they took the Qingfeng shuttle directly and followed behind everyone to protect them in case of unexpected situations. In order to ensure safety, everyone slowed down as much as possible and cautiously approached the island in the center. The closer the distance, the richer the spiritual energy and the thicker the surrounding fog. Everything is shrouded in white mist, and only the clear sound of paddling is left around. Such a quiet environment should be extremely enjoyable, but no one is in the mood to appreciate it. Instead, they are always vigilant about the surrounding environment, for fear of any unexpected situation. Especially in the lake, Zhou Daocheng was always paying attention to the possibility that there might be powerful aquatic monsters here. In the event of a sudden attack, it would be difficult for the members of the hunting team to survive. But fortunately, the lake here has been very calm, and no accidents occurred until everyone approached the island. When everyone successfully landed on the island and looked at this new environment, they felt like they were in another world. It wasn't until this moment that I was completely sure that this should be a third-level spiritual vessel. The quality is higher than imagined, and the value is more than dozens of times higher than the second-order high-grade spiritual veins. Even to the Wang family of Qianyan Mountain, the Tang family of Tian Puppet, and even the Qingshan sect, third-level spiritual veins are of extremely high value, let alone a small Zhou family. Zhou Daocheng looked around, taking stock of the surrounding environment, and found that except for the heavy humidity, there were almost no shortcomings here. The terrain is flat and the soil is fertile. It does not require any artificial watering and can be grown as a spiritual field. Moreover, there seem to be many precious elixirs growing inside the island. Just walking into the forest on the island, Zhou Daocheng saw several red Ganoderma clustered together, growing very gratifyingly. At present, the quality of these red Ganoderma flowers has just reached the second level, and can be used to refine second-level healing elixirs, which are valuable. After walking a few steps, I found another jade dew flower among the dead leaves. It is also an extremely precious second-level elixir. The flower blooms as crystal clear as dewdrops and emits a light fragrance. Smelling it can purify the mind and restore health, mood. Generally speaking, after the gyokuro flower is fully bloomed, it can be picked, processed in ancient ways, and finally ground into powder to make an extremely precious sandalwood called gyokuro sandalwood. If you burn this kind of jade dew sandalwood during practice, it can soothe the mind, calm the soul, and maintain a peaceful state of mind. It can quickly enter the state of practice and make it less likely to become possessed. These elixirs are extremely precious in the world of immortality. They only exist in some little-known remote mountain wildernesses. I didn't expect them to be found on this island. It's really surprising. Zhou Daocheng saw that the jade dew flower was mature, so he picked it directly. As for the red Ganoderma, the age was not yet fully reached, so he continued to grow it in the same place. Continuing to go deeper into the island, Zhou Daocheng saw a lot of spiritual medicines one after another. Because of the rich spiritual energy, most of them were second-level spiritual medicines. This time, Zhou Daocheng did not pick them at random, but let them grow. After all, Zhou Daocheng is not a spiritual plant master, and he does not understand spiritual medicines. Maybe some spiritual medicines can reproduce. Picking and destroying them at will may cause huge losses. Later, spiritual plant masters should be arranged to come and check and arrange the picking and transplanting of these spiritual medicines reasonably. The most important task now is to explore whether there is any danger on this island, but from the current point of view, the environment here is very safe, and even monsters do not exist. But for safety reasons, Zhou Daocheng still plans to take a walk around, at least to ensure that he understands the situation of the entire island. The area of the island is not small, it is larger than expected, and it should be equivalent to most of the Balin Lake. The place where everyone landed on the island, that is, the west side of the island, is a large area of dense forests, where many precious second-level spiritual medicines grow. But as we continued to go deeper, the terrain in the middle began to rise gradually, forming a small hill with a height of less than 100 meters. Behind this hill was the core area of the island, which was also the place with the richest spiritual energy. The quality had truly reached the third grade lower grade, and was even close to the third grade middle grade. The area where the spiritual vein is located is also a not-so-high mountain, stretching from north to south and stretching for several kilometers. It is much larger than any spiritual vein Zhou Daocheng has ever seen. Walking next to the spiritual veins, the surrounding vegetation is dense, with many lush spiritual plants growing. The environment is also extremely quiet, and the spiritual energy lingers in the air like mist. Suddenly, Zhou Daocheng frowned slightly and said, "Brother, do you think it is possible that it is not a spiritual vein, but a spiritual stone vein?" Zhou Daobai was stunned for a moment, with a thoughtful look in his eyes, and said uncertainly, "It is indeed possible. If you reach the third level of quality spiritual veins, you may have already condensed the spiritual stone veins." Spiritual veins and spiritual stone veins are two completely different concepts. The value of the spirit stone veins far exceeds that of the spirit veins, and the value has increased several times. A spiritual vein is just an earth vein that can continuously produce spiritual energy. However, if the spiritual energy is absorbed too much too quickly, it is likely to cause the spiritual vein to dry up. Therefore, many small families do not allow monks to practice near spiritual veins, in order to prevent the absorption of too much spiritual energy from causing the quality of the spiritual veins to decline or directly fail. But the spiritual stone veins are completely different. In the extremely rich spiritual veins, a large amount of spiritual energy condenses together and infects the surrounding stones, thus forming spiritual ores, which are spiritual stones. Therefore, in the spirit stone veins, a large number of spirit stones can be mined, which are of extremely high value and are equivalent to huge treasures in themselves. Moreover, generally speaking, spiritual veins must reach the third level or above before spiritual stone veins can appear, so there is almost no chance of exhaustion due to the absorption of spiritual energy. As long as the spiritual stones are not overexploited, the spiritual energy will hardly decline, and there will be very strong spiritual energy condensed around the spiritual stone veins. For example, the air around the entire island and even the entire lake contains very rich spiritual energy. Zhou Daocheng thought about it and came to the area with the strongest spiritual veins. He took out a first-level high-grade magic weapon and began to chop the stones on the ground. The outer stones were easily chopped off, but they were all ordinary stones, nothing special. After chopping for a quarter of an hour, the exposed rocks were still ordinary stones without any aura, which made Zhou Daocheng a little disappointed. But not long after, there was a sudden, ding, sound. Zhou Daocheng's movements in his hands paused, his eyes moved, and then he looked sharply. A translucent ore appeared in the gray-brown rock, shining with a warm pale white light, and a rich spiritual energy came out of it. This is a spiritual stone. Zhou Daocheng was immediately overjoyed. He increased the strength in his hands and quickly dug into the surrounding rocks, digging out an irregular spiritual stone the size of his head. This is a pure natural low-grade spiritual stone, which is also mixed with a lot of suppression. It needs to be refined and cut in the later stage, and it will also become a spiritual stone used by monks. The large and small spiritual stone mine I have now will probably be able to refine 20 to 30 low-grade spiritual stones in the end. Not only was Zhou Daocheng excited, but Zhou Daobai and all the members of the hunting team were also overjoyed to see this scene. This is like picking up a huge treasure for nothing. As long as they are not mined or destroyed at will, this spiritual vein alone is enough to make the entire Zhou family rich for more than 100 years. After confirming that this was a spirit stone vein, Zhou Daocheng had completely made up his mind to make this the new ancestral land of the Zhou family. As for other areas on the island, Zhou Daocheng had no intention of exploring in depth. He simply sent members of the hunting team to wander around other parts of the island to confirm that there was no danger. However, what Zhou Daocheng didn't expect was that on this island, besides this vein of spirit stone, there was actually another extremely precious item. Half an hour later, to the east of the Lingxi vein, Zhou Daocheng looked at the tea tree in front of him, with some doubts in his eyes, and asked with some uncertainty, "What kind of tea tree is this?" The quality actually reaches the second level top grade. The eldest brother Zhou Daobai shook his head helplessly and said, "You should learn more about elixirs. You don't even know this precious elixir." Zhou Daocheng twitched the corners of his mouth, raised his eyebrows and said, "Don't be too pretentious, just tell me what this is." Awakening tea tree. Zhou Daobai gently stroked the leaves of the tea tree and said a name. Can't hide the excitement in his eyes. When Zhou Daocheng heard the name, he frowned and murmured, then his eyes suddenly lit up and he repeated, "Xingshan tea tree. Is this the Xingshan tea tree?" Zhou Daobai nodded slightly and said, 3 feet tall, with lush branches and leaves. The leaves are tiny and bright green, with faint gold scattered patterns. The branches have a faint scent of green sandalwood. They themselves have the function of dispelling miasma. The stems, roots, and trunks, branches, leaves, and flowers can all be used as medicine. Zhou Daocheng compared the characteristics of the Xingshan tea tree based on the memory in his mind. The more he observed, the faster his heart beat. It seems. It's really the awakening tea tree. Zhou Daocheng was quite unbelievable. The awakening tea tree is a second-level spiritual plant, but its own value is even more than some third-level elixirs. Perhaps, only the spiritual life tree obtained previously can be compared with the value of this precious spiritual plant. The most precious thing about the awakening tea tree is its tea leaves. After brewing and drinking, it can enhance spiritual power, allowing monks to have strong spiritual consciousness during the foundation building stage. You know, one of the most difficult thresholds to break through the Z mansion is to improve your own spiritual consciousness. However, among the second-level natural treasures, there are very few items that can enhance spiritual power, so cultivators can only slowly enhance their spiritual consciousness through years of training and accumulation, which is an extremely slow process. There are many 9th-level foundation building cultivators who are not qualified to break through the Purple Mansion until their lifespans are exhausted because of the slow accumulation of spiritual consciousness. If a force has a refreshing tea tree, it means that the probability of breaking through the Purple Mansion has increased by 10% to 20%. Cultivators who often take refreshing tea can also quickly enhance their spiritual power, have stronger spiritual consciousness, have more acute observation, or use spiritual spells and have stronger combat power. Either point is enough to illustrate the preciousness of this tea tree. However, in front of them, there is a refreshing tea tree, and it seems to be mature and can be picked directly. Zhou Daocheng picked a piece directly and put it in his mouth. The slightly bitter taste spread, making him frown. But not long after, a sense of coolness spread throughout the body, and then poured into the mind, and the thinking instantly became much clearer. Even some of the problems that were not understood in the techniques, or the problems encountered in the formation techniques, had solutions. Zhou Daocheng couldn't help but secretly said, "Good stuff. Spiritual plants of this level are the treasures that can truly increase the foundation and raise the upper limit of the entire Zhou family." The Zhou family now owns a lot of things like this that can be used as family heritage. Zhou Daocheng counted them silently and found that the 4 types of purple air bamboo, mist grass, lingshou tree, and xingshan tea tree all have unique characteristics. Ordinary value. The first 2 are mainly used to provide spiritual energy and create an environment rich in spiritual energy. They are also a very important part of the foundation. The value of the latter 2 is even more extraordinary. The lingshou tree can increase lifespan, and the awakening tea tree can increase the possibility of breaking through the zifu. No matter which one it is, if placed in any foundation building family, it is enough to give the family unlimited prospects. Zhou Daobai said solemnly, "Sixth brother, go back and make preparations to let the people of Balan Lake move here. With this place as the foundation, why worry about my Zhou family not prospering?" Zhou Daocheng did not refuse, and nodded, "I will make arrangements when I go back. This is really the most suitable place to stay." Although he was excited, Zhou Daocheng still showed the palace of the leader of the force, calmed down his emotions, and started making arrangements in an orderly manner. First of all, it is to learn about the situation of the entire island from the hunting team. In any case, the safety here needs to be confirmed. But judging from the information obtained, the situation is not bad. The entire middle of the island is surrounded by hills that are not too high. In the center are the spirit stone veins and the awakening tea trees, which are the most precious areas on the entire island. To the west of the island is a dense forest in which many elixirs grow. It is suitable to be used as a breeding base for special elixirs and should bring a lot of profits. To the east of the island, the area is larger, the terrain is flat, and the soil is fertile. There are many weeds growing there now, and it will be suitable for cultivating spiritual fields in the future. As for the south and north, the environment is not as good as the east and west sides. Relatively speaking, the terrain is relatively steep, with many uneven cliffs and mountains. However, with a little modification, it should be able to be used later. As for whether there is danger on the island, at present, it seems that there is not one, and not even a monster beast has been seen. After all, this place is surrounded by colorful miasma, and few monsters can enter here. Monsters that have the ability to enter here, such as some powerful third-level monsters, don't seem to have discovered this place. After understanding the situation clearly, Zhou Daocheng felt completely at ease. Gathering all the members of the hunting team, Zhou Daocheng arranged for them to go to the plain area to the east, find a flat area, and start setting up the tooling hut. Looking at the current situation, Zhou Daocheng plans to let the 5 hunting teams stay here directly. Even from now on, these people will stay here directly without returning to Wugyufang City. On the one hand, it is because this new station really needs a group of trustworthy people to guard it, and the members of the hunting team around them are all the most trustworthy subordinates. Moreover, those who can come with him this time are all monks who have used the spiritual mystical method and are completely trustworthy in terms of loyalty. On the other hand, it also gradually transformed Wugyufang City's combat power into private combat power, and truly became a member of the Zhou family. Looking at the 35 people in front of him, Zhou Daocheng hesitated for a moment, considering that this place would become the residence of the Zhou family, and these people would stay here in the future, so it was necessary to reveal some information to them. After thinking for a moment, Zhou Daocheng said, "The people standing here are all my most trusted people. Many of them have been in Wugyufang City for more than 3 years. So, have you ever had any doubts about my identity?" Everyone present was stunned, as if they didn't understand why Zhou Daocheng said these words. There were also some people with a trace of confusion on their faces, who seemed to be confused about Zhou Daocheng's identity. This mysterious Lord of the Mists always wears a bronze mask. As for his identity, no one knows at all. Zhou Daocheng did not show off and directly took off the bronze mask on his face. When the young face was revealed to everyone, many people had a look of surprise on their faces. Many people did not expect that the Lord of Wugyufeng, who established Wugyufeng City, was actually such a young man. It was very different from the image they had expected of the Lord of Foggy Valley. At the same time, some people couldn't help but let out a sigh, and glanced back and forth on the faces of Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai, with strange expressions on their faces. Aware of these gazes, Zhou Daocheng smiled and said to everyone, "I will tell you frankly today that my name is Zhou Daocheng. Of course, you can continue to call me the Lord of Fog Valley." Zhou Daocheng. Hey, such a familiar name. Indeed, I seem to have heard it somewhere. By the way, do you know what Senior Zhou's name is? It seems to be called Zhou Dao. What the hell? The eldest brother Zhou Daobai smiled, took a step forward, and said loudly, "My name is Zhou Daobai." As the voice fell, the scene immediately fell silent. Many people only knew that it was the Zhou family's foundation building expert, but did not know his specific name. However, when Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai reported their names at the same time, even a fool discovered the relationship. In particular, Meng Yushan, Lin Yuan, Huang Hezhong, Lu Chengzhou and other 9th-level Qi refining captains murmured to themselves thoughtfully, "Zhou Daocheng. Zhou Daobai. You guys." After thinking about these two names carefully, many people showed expressions of sudden realization and looked at the two people in front of them in surprise. Lin Yuan even exclaimed, "FCK. Are you brothers?" Meng Yushan also looked strange, looking at Zhou Daocheng and Zhou Daobai curiously, and indeed saw some similarities in their faces. "Sir, you guys are really brothers, so what about your identity?" Although many people already have the answer in their minds, they still dare not speculate. They all look at Zhou Daocheng, waiting for the answer. Zhou Daocheng did not show off, and said directly, "To tell you the truth, I am a member of the Zhou family. I am the 6th in the Dao family. As fellow Taoist Zhou, I am my eldest brother." When they actually heard the answer, many people were still extremely shocked and felt quite unreal. Unexpectedly, the mysterious Lord of Wugu is actually a Taoist junior of the Zhou family. Once this news comes out, many people will be shocked. Zhou Daocheng just looked at everyone with a smile and let them talk and talk. After gradually calming down, he said, "You are nominally members of Wugu, but in fact you are my people, which is equivalent to being members of the Zhou family." Everyone was stunned. This identity change seemed a bit fast. Suddenly, from a member of the hunting team in Foggy Valley, he directly became a soldier of the Zhou family. They also looked at each other, and for a moment they could not accept the change of identity. Zhou Daocheng naturally knew that the identity of the hunting team in Wugu Market and the identity of the Zhou family power seemed to be not much different, but in fact there was a big difference. Becoming a member of the family power would obviously have greater restrictions, which would make many members of the hunting team uncomfortable. Zhou Daocheng naturally understood this and took the initiative to say, "Everyone, don't think too much. Whether it is your status and treatment, or what you have to do, it is not much different from before. You are still hunting as a hunting team. It's just that you will stay on this island most of the time in the future, and use this place as your main base." Zhou Daocheng's idea is actually very simple, that is, to separate his own power in Wugu Market from the market itself as much as possible. Although nominally, Wugu Market is controlled by him, the Lord of Wugu, after all, it is a market, and there are a lot of other forces inside the market. For example, Shaodan Pavilion, Wang family, Xian Pavilion Qin family, Lingxi sect, etc., they have all taken root in the market and occupied a large share in the market. In the eyes of many people, the power of the hunting team and the guard team does not belong to a certain person, but to the entire Wugu market. Whoever controls the Wugu market is equivalent to controlling the hunting team and the guard team. Even many members of the hunting team and the guard team think so, and regard themselves as the managers of the Wugu market. However, Zhou Daocheng wants to break this concept. The hunting team and the guard team have never been bound to the Wugu market, but to him, Zhou Daocheng. This concept does not need to be told to other forces in the market for the time being, but it must be rooted in the consciousness of the hunting team and the hunting team. He does not want to work hard for decades, and the power accumulated in the end will be used as a wedding dress for others out of thin air. Therefore, the safest way is to transform the hunting team of Wugyufeng City into Zhou Daocheng's men of the Zhou family. Perhaps the process will be more difficult, but in the long run, it is very necessary to do so. Among the 35 people present, some of them looked calm, just a little surprised, and had no other emotions, such as Meng Yushan and Lin Yuan, who were originally Zhou Daocheng's people and had a very clear understanding of themselves. But some people frowned slightly, thinking about something, and seemed unable to accept the change of their identity for a while. Zhou Daocheng did not force it, but said, "Of course, I don't ask everyone to stay. If you want to return to Wugyufang City, I can take you back. I hope you can think clearly about what choice to make." At this point, there was already a hint of warning. Different choices will naturally have different results. Meng Yushan and Lin Yuan were very tactful. Seeing that the situation was gradually deadlocked, they took the initiative to speak and plan to set an example. Generally speaking, as long as one person makes a choice, it will naturally lead others. But this time, Zhou Daocheng stopped the two with his eyes. Because this time it's not a joke, we don't need people who are hypocritical, but people who are willing to join the Zhou family and become his personal subordinates. Therefore, he gave everyone enough time to think, hoping that everyone would make their own choices with a sincere attitude. After a cup of tea, Huang Hezhong thought for a long time and suddenly said, "Senior Zhou, I agree to this matter. I can break through to the 9th level of qi refining, and I have to thank you for your medicinal bath. And now I am under the control of the spiritual secret method. In fact, I am already your private soldier. Now I just change my identity and change to such a place." Zhou Daocheng took a deep look at this person and nodded with satisfaction. This person seems rough and unintelligent, but in fact he is simple-minded and pure. Since joining Zhou Daocheng, he has been working diligently. Isn't this great wisdom? Zhou Daocheng pondered for a moment and said seriously, "Okay, I can promise you that you will never lose because of today's choice." Zhou Daocheng has made a decision in his heart. As long as the conditions are sufficient and if this person is talented enough, he will fully support this person to improve his strength. The future identity will most likely be the same as Meng Yushan, Lin Yuan, Qin Lai, Wei Hanshan and others. And what he said instantly awakened the other members of the hunting team who were thinking. One person's eyes lit up, scratched his head helplessly, and said, "Senior Zhou, after being reminded by Captain Huang, I found that I don't have the room for him to choose. I am controlled by Captain Huang's spiritual secrets. Except for following him, I have no other place to go." The voice with a slight accent echoed in the team, and everyone was stunned. Yes, even if you think more, it's useless. Almost all the people in the hunting team and the guard team have actually accepted the spiritual secrets. Zhou Daocheng directly controls Meng Yushan, Lin Yuan, Qin Lai, Wei Hanshan and others. Meng Yushan directly controls several captains of the hunting team, and Wei Hanshan controls several captains of the guard team. These captains use the secret method of spirit to control the members under them. There is no other way to do this. Zhou Daocheng cannot pass on the precious skills to the casual cultivators who have no guarantee at all. That's why he had to do this. Besides, after accepting the secret method of spirit, they did get a lot of benefits. Thinking about it carefully, whether it is a hunting team in Wugyufang City or joining the Zhou family and becoming Zhou Daocheng's personal subordinate, it seems that there is not much difference. Many people understood this and agreed to it without hesitation. Zhou Daocheng was also happy with this. This was equivalent to transforming the power accumulated in Wugu into the power of the Zhou family, which was more private. This group of people could hide here and develop this new station. With the help of the better environment here, Zhou Daocheng could secretly cultivate them. After arranging the Earth Spirit House, Zhou Daocheng began to arrange for everyone, strictly speaking, for the 5 captains. The 5 captains were Meng Yushan, Lin Yuan, Lu Chengzhou, Huang Hezhong, and Han Lei. They were all cultivators of the 9th level of qi refining, and their loyalty was guaranteed. The 5 people used to be casual cultivators, and they all made a living by hunting monsters. What they were best at was actually leading the hunting team to hunt. However, the geographical location of this island is quite special now, and it is surrounded by colorful miasma. Zhou Daocheng must not be at ease with them going out to hunt monsters. So, it is better to arrange them to take care of the island. But after thinking for a long time, I found that many jobs are not suitable for them. For example, the forest to the west grows a lot of precious spiritual medicines. Zhou Daocheng couldn't send them to look after the spiritual medicines because they didn't understand them at all. It would be good if they didn't waste them. This kind of thing must be handed over to the second sister Zhou Daoyu or Wan Yang. They are both spiritual plant masters, and their level is not low. Plant masters, and their level is not low. Plant masters.